For me, a farbrengen was like a living Torah coming alive in so many multi-dimensions. There's one hand, there's the Moshiach, the ideas that the Rebbe shares in a Maimer or Sicha. Then there's the emotional feelings, whether it's the nigunim, or even the ideas that Rebbe is sharing that are very personal or that stimulate the emotions. And then there was the whole vibe. You felt l'mayla masar tfachim. Farbrengen by the Rebbe was, you felt like you were traveling to another time and place.
This episode is made possible by Kerem Mamish. To learn more about Kerem Mamish, stay tuned later on in the episode for more details. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please like and subscribe so that others can enjoy it as well. In addition, if you've benefited in any way from a Monk Chassidim podcast and would like to give something back, you can do so today at derher.org/donate. I'm Yossi Kamen. Welcome to Among Chassidim by Derher, an ongoing farbrengen about life as a chassid, our vibrant connection with the Rebbe, and inspired living shaped by the way he teaches us each and every day.
Shalom Aleichem, Agotavach, Rabbi Jacobson, how are you?
Aleichem Shalom, Baruch Hashem, wonderful to be with you.
Okay, great. This is a special edition of Among Chassidim. As we're recording it live, there's an audience at the Kinus Hashluchim, the Regional Kinus of New York and New England and Suffolk, Connecticut. And I hope everyone here enjoys and all our listeners enjoy.
My pleasure. We look forward.
Okay. So I'm curious, I would like to know, you have two Zaydas, and they both have a fame in different ways. And I want to hear about your Zaydas and especially about your father, and then we'll move on to Rabbi Simon Jacobson. So you pick which Zayda you want to begin with.
Okay, so I'm a good, interesting combination of Tzugikum and Gezer. You all know what that means, right? I'll start with my father's side, okay? So actually our name is not Jacobson. Family name is Yakubashvili. And for many years that was a family secret. But now Georgians have become very wealthy, so it's like everybody wants to be Georgian. So now Yakubashvili, we're thinking even of changing it back. But we haven't come to a consensus on that. So Yakubashvili means in Georgian, Shvili is son of Yaakov. When surnames were given, just as an example, since we're talking Chabad, Alter Rebbe's name was not Schneerson. The Mittler Rebbe is the son of Schneer. Alter Rebbe was Schneer, Schneeyuri.
Barchavich.
Yeah. So Yakubashvili was the name of my father's father. His name was Simon Jacobson. I'm named after him. And he himself was a Georgian Jew, born in a city called Kutaisi, or Kutais, Georgia. Just for the record, Georgian Jewry goes back, traces its origins all the way to Bayis Rishon, meaning by Golas Bavel, when the Jews went to Babylon, so then they migrated north. It included Armenia, Georgia, and so on. So even when the Jews returned to build the second base of Midrash with Ezra, many remained in Bavel. Bavel would be Persia, Iraq, and so on, and many remained in Georgia. Just again aside, you'll see there are very few Kahanim, if any at all, in Gruzinim, because Ezra made a condition, if you want to stay, I need the Kahanim and the Levim. Okay, so my father's family traces its way back thousands of years, literally. I've met many of them, cousins and so on. And my grandfather was obviously not a Chabad by birth. He was a Georgian Jew. They're considered somewhat Sfardim. But in Tofresh Ayin Ches, or Ayin Tes, that would be equivalent of 1918, 1919, he was traveling to Italy on behalf of his family business. And the war, World War I, was taking place, which is one of the reasons that Rebbe Rashab moved from Lubavitch to Rostov, because it was the front lines. So he couldn't really travel, so he ended up in Rostov for Rosh Hashanah that year. And he saw Chassidim running to the Rebbe Rashab. So he was intrigued and he followed along. And he was taken by the Rebbe Rashab's Tia Shefer and that whole Rosh Hashanah experience. It's a long story, which I know we want to keep time limited, but briefly, bottom line, he ended up staying in Rostov. The Rebbe Rashab told him to go to Tomchit Mimim.
1 second, but when a Georgian Jew ending up in Rostov, like he spoke Yiddish?
He spoke Hebrew. He didn't speak Yiddish at the time. Later he spoke Yiddish. I remember I never met him because I was born after his passing. So he spoke Hebrew with the Rebbe Rashab, but then he joined Tomchit Mimim, became a Tomim.
So instead of going to Italy for business.
Matter of fact, the Rebbe Rashab told him that one day you'll go to Italy on my behalf. The Rebbe in the first farbrengens, Yud Shvat Tavshin Yud Aleph, says da Eid, was it mitgezählt, als der Rebbe hat gesagt, als fahren in Italien, und sie gekommen geworden 37 Jahre später, which means there's a Yid, he's referring to my grandfather, the Rebbe in the farbrengens Yud Shvat, when he was kabbaled in the seers. There's a Yid that the Rebbe told him he'll be going to Italy, and it was Mukuyim 37 years later. Which is a whole, again, there's a lot of details around it. So bottom line, he stayed there, began to learn Tomchit Mimim, and was taken by Chassidus, and became a full-fledged Chassid. And he ended up marrying the niece of Rab Shmuel Levitin, who was a shliach of the Rebbe Rashab to Gruzia.
Shmuel was the shliach.
Right. So he read the shidduch of his niece. So it was like the first intermarriage between Ashkenazi and Asfardi, or between Tzugi Kumene, and my grandfather. And my grandmother was a blue blood Chabadnik, goes all the way back to the Alter Rebbe. My grandmother's name was Freda. Chodosh was their family name. Her father was Yerachmiel Chodosh. My father's name, Gershon Ber, is named after Gershon Ber Paharer, because his mother Freda was a great granddaughter of Gershon Ber Paharer, the great chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. So that covers more or less. My grandfather became Simon, that is, one of the 10 Yidden in Tofresh Pei Gimel in 1923 that made the Krisis Bris, the Friedrich Rebbe, that they would do everything possible to the last drop of blood to be Meiser Nefesh for the Jews in Russia.
So he was part of that group.
So he was one of the 10, and he was arrested, ended up in Siberia, but because of his Georgian connections, Stalin, and Beria were all Georgians. So they were their mafia was able to figure out a way. They didn't get shot. But my father was the oldest of 3 children that he had. My father, Gershon Ber, had a brother, Bitzalel, and another brother, Shalom Jacobson, who was born actually in Poking later in Germany after they left. So they left, like many Chabad families, 1945, from Moscow. My father was born in Moscow, and they ended up in Poking. The Rebbe's mother, for example, was in Poking in Germany, one of the DP camps, and they ended up in Toronto, 1950-51, where my grandfather and grandmother are buried. And he passed away in 1953. He met the Rebbe, Unser Rebbe. He was there by farbrengens, Beis Tammuz, like the Rebbe referred to him in the farbrengens Tavshin Yud Aleph. But he was really broken physically by the torture in Siberia. They broke his spine, His spirit remained strong, but my father would tell me that. So he passed away at the age maybe 50, 51 years old. And then my grandmother passed away within another year or two later. So my father was left as a Yosem, was called a Kail Chediki Yosem, both from father and mother, by 19. And he had 2 little brothers that he had to take care of. So that briefly covers, so my grandfather was a Yichus, was Mesiris Nefesh. And then he continued that work in Italy on behalf of the Rebbe then, 37 years later in the Tofshin Zayin, Tofshin Ches.
So the Friedrich Rebbe sent him to Italy?
It's a little confusing. It looks like the Rebbe Rashab was the one that actually mentioned it, but the Friedrich Rebbe obviously reinforced it. So we are still working on the details, to be honest.
And then he went to Toronto afterwards?
Yeah, he went to Italy and in Europe, and he was continuing the shlichus of... if you want me to go into details, I can go a lot. I don't know. You control the time here.
Well, I think that...
We have till 6 a.m.
6 a.m. is good, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that the general overview is good. because you have a lot to share on your own, and I want to hear about your father. So maybe tell us a little bit about your other Zayde, Yankel Lipsker.
Yeah, so that's my father's side. My mother's side, my mother's a Lipsker. Her maiden name is Lipsker. She's the oldest of 9 children of Yankel Lipsker, who married to Luba Alta Teibel. Her maiden name was Lepkivka. So we're like cousins with the Lapkovskis, we're cousins with Feldman, we're cousins with the Offens. They're all sisters of my mother's mother. My mother's father, Lipsker, that was born in Poltava, so the big Lipsker family, there's a big one in Eretz Yisrael. He was Leibel Lipsker. Leibel Lipsker was an older brother. Yankel was a younger one. Michal Lipsker is another brother. Menucha Lazarov, for example, Shimon Lazarov is again a cousin of my mother's. Batsheva Shemtov, who married Vermel Shemtov, is also Lazarov, just to give you the... So these are large families. They were born in Poltava. They were originally, I think, not Chabad Chassidim. The Lipsker, I think they were... I remember right now, different sug. But bottom line, then in Russia, people went to the yeshivas. So my grandfather, Yankel Lipsker, came very similar. He ended up in Kutayis, ironically. Nothing connected to the Yakubashvili side, because he ended up doing work there and business, and they opened a shtikl yeshiva there. And my mother was born in Kutayis. My father was born in Moscow. So there's a little twist of things. Last year, my mother turned 90. We actually took her to Kutayis, to her birthplace, which was also an old cemetery of my ancestors. So Yankel Lipsker, to cut to the chase, was in Paris for a number of years. Some people may know that the Rebbe, when he came to Paris to meet his mother, Chana, the Rebbe Chana, he trusted my grandmother's cooking. She was the one that brought him food. He was only trusted her, just to put things in context. Then they came to the United States in around 1947. They saw the Friedrich Rebbe. The Friedrich Rebbe told them to buy a farm in New Jersey. Farm was still industry. There were people who bought farms in Vineland and in other cities in New Jersey. And then that was not shaykh anymore, chinuch. So he moved to Crown Heights. My grandfather, Yankel Lipsker, with my grandmother, with my mother and her siblings. So I have a very famous uncles, the Gabbai of 770, Zalman Lipsker, Beda Lipsker, Avrama Lipsker, and others. And he became a Gabbai after Rabbi Yechanan Gordon, who was the main Gabbai in 770. He passed away at Tavshin Chavtes, I think it was 1969. So then 3 Gabbayim were elected or appointed. My grandfather, Bolsovsky, and Shia Pinson. So my grandfather became one of the Gabbayim of 770. He was involved mostly in choosing the Chazonim. I remember him always arguing with my grandmother. He would always say, what do you think about the Chazan? Tell me the Chazan that davened for the Rebbe. My grandmother said, Gornish, you can't have him. Couldn't hear the Chazan. And my grandfather says, better a Chazan you can't hear that knows Nusach than a Chazan you could hear doesn't know Nusach. Every Shabbos they would have this argument. I'm the oldest grandchild, so I was always sitting there, just to give you a little taste of that world. My grandfather had a famous grocery store, Lipsker Superette, which lost more money than it made.
Today it's
Khan. Today Khan turned it into a whole empire. But my grandfather, first of all, he gave cigarettes either at cost price or free to the Bach. All the grandchildren were getting ice cream for free. Anyone that said that they can't afford it, it was, let's put it this way, it wasn't a business. It was more of a therapy session, because my grandmother, people would come to her for counseling. This is my childhood. I don't know if any old-timers from Crown Heights, but it was a fixture on Kingston and Union, where Khan is today. So my grandfather was the Chazan. He was also an amateur carpenter. So he would he had the woodwork in his basement. The Aron Kodesh in 770 is that the Rebbe's table has a certain look. There's a certain
Chazanstand.
Yeah.
Upstairs also.
Yeah.
One upstairs, that whole set.
Yeah, anything that looks like those. I don't know, how do you define it? Whatever, checkerboard. I don't know. So he built it all in the basement. And they lived on President between Albany and Kingston. My grandfather passed away in Tovshem Memhei, 1985. My grandmother years later. And that's my mother's genes. And I'm this strange mix of Georgian, Lipska, it's a complicated. I mean, we're not going to do group therapy here, but if you want to understand some of the Mishagas of the Jacobsons, you have to get to know how the gene pool.
That's why I asked about it. We need to get the background.
No, I understood what's going on here, yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you about your father.
Just for the record, if you want to complicate matters more, when I met some of my Gruzina cousins, they let me know that my grandfather's Simon father actually was born in Yerushalayim, because he had to run away from Georgia. He was born in Yerushalayim, his great-grandfather. Then he came back to Georgia. So that really messed everything up. Now you have a
Shalmi angle.
Shalmi genes, I don't know how that fits in. But, so in other words, if you guys think you're weird, so am I. Okay.
So let me ask you about your father, Gershon Ber Jacobson, which is a unique figure in Lubavitch and a unique yachas with the Rebbe.
Yeah.
Journalist and later Algemeiner. So let's hear a little bit about that. And also, some of this you witnessed firsthand, I imagine.
Yeah. As I said, my grandfather passed away before he was born. Passed away in Tovshin Yud Gimel. I'm born Tovshin Yud Zayin, so 1956. It's probably noteworthy to mention my birthday is Hey Tevis, Tovshin Yud Zayin. I turned 30 Tovshin Mem Zayin when the Dan Notzach happened. So my father is the oldest, as I said, of three children. He came to Crown Heights, even though his parents were in Toronto, he came to 770, basically 1951. So you'll see him in pictures.
He's a bacher.
Yeah, he's a bacher, yeah. He got married in 1955 to my mother. I'll tell you the story in a moment. So my father came to 770, and you'll see him in pictures. There's quite a few pictures like at by Chassidus, on the early bacher in those years. He was already had a chush aksiva, had to write. As a matter of fact, in Brunois, when he learned in the yeshiva, my father was in Brunois, so he was caught writing an article in Yiddish for a Yiddish newspaper in Paris.
Already then?
Yeah, he was already a troublemaker.
What did Rebbe Nissen do?
Oh, don't ask. That's why I was sharing it. So I was never in Brunois, but my father told me that there was a room that was like a cathedral, like, where Galachim once used to do confession. So Rabbi Nissen would call in a bacher there, and he got my grandfather to come from Italy, and they're sitting there, and Rabbi Nissen was like trembling. He says, Gershon Ber. This is my way my father would tell the story. A bacher is allein nach Zeitung. Ich gewinn mufrich legamri. Du schreibst nach Zeitung, mit deinem Namen noch. I'll translate. He says, for a bacher to read a newspaper, in Lubavitch, it was like completely, no one ever read a newspaper. And you're writing a newspaper with your name. At least you should have changed your name. My father was like this guy. I guess he was never a conformist. So, he said, I made believe I feel bad, but I didn't really. I felt bad that he schlepped my father from Italy. And so I think they threw him out of yeshiva for 2 weeks. After I said, so what happened? He says, my father, I said, how did your father react? He said, my father says, Gershon Ber, as long as you're in yeshiva, you have to follow the rules. Afterwards, do what you want. But now you're that was, so he was already a writer, basically. I mean, it wasn't professional. So when he came to the United States, he went straight to journalism.
While he was in the yeshiva in 770?
Yeah, no, but not like part-time. It wasn't like a full-time job. He started writing. Like he would write an article for the Herald Tribune. There was a newspaper called the New York Herald Tribune.
English?
In English.
How do you know how to write English?
He knew. I guess he learned how to write. He always had a very strong Russian accent, but writing was perfect.
Do you know if he spoke to the Rebbe about this then?
Yeah, I'm sure he did, because I'll tell you why. So my father started. No, he wasn't writing like professionally. He'd submit an article here and there, and then he got. I don't know what year he began to write for the Algemeiner Journal. That was a daily Yiddish newspaper. Daily, probably mid the mid-Yuds, like probably Tovshin Tezvov, when he got married, approximately, I would say. I know because the Rebbe, you're familiar with Kovitz Lubavitch. It's a whole parsha of its own. You ever cover it?
It was reprinted.
Yeah.
Recently, Koss reprinted.
Yeah, so the Rebbe was the editor of it. That's where Tshuva Sibirim.
We wrote an article covering Kovitz Lubavitch.
So Tshuva Sibirim, the Rebbe had a column, but it also covered Lubavitch events and Simchas. In the Tovshin Vav, Tovshin Zayin, what years was Kovitz Lubavitch? Tovshin Hey? Then it stopped. In Tovshin Yudalit or Tezvov, I think, the Rebbe renewed it, but he had Shmuel Zalmanov, who was a very talented writer himself. He did Sefer Negunim and stuff like that. He had Shmuel Zalmanov become the editor, and the Rebbe suggested to my father to work for Shmuel Zalmanov.
In Kovitz Lubavitch.
Kovitz Lubavitch. So my father was definitely involved in writing. I don't know.
That's Lashon Kodesh.
Lashon Kodesh, but was there columns in Yiddish at all?
I think it's in Hebrew.
It's all in Hebrew, so it could be. My father was fluent in Hebrew. In writing, he could write Yiddish, Hebrew, Russian, even German. He was good at languages. I saw stuff from him. But I can't tell you exactly how much he wrote, but that's where I know Tovshin Tezayin and farbrengens, Yud Beis Tammuz. My father was married Chanukah Tovshin Tezayin. So we're talking now 1955. So Yud Beis Tammuz Tovshin Tezayin, on tape you could hear the Rebbe says, Gershon Ber, Zog l'chaim, aber nicht auf Tint. Say l'chaim, but not on ink. So clearly he was an ink guy. And the Rebbe wanted to make sure they should say l'chaim on the real thing, not on ink. As a metaphor. So he was clearly involved in writing. And then I guess, I know he became, there was a thing called Radio Free Europe. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
No.
It was radio broadcasting that was reaching the Soviet Union, because Soviet Union was an iron curtain, you couldn't get in. But radio could get there. It helped people get information outside of the Soviet Union. So we have pictures. I saw my father speaking on radio. So he was involved in media, basically. Years later, I asked my father, why did he go into media? All your friends became, tricotage, selling schmattes or whatever they did. So he said, because newspaper covers everything. Everything in life is covered in newspaper. I also asked my father then, I was a little kid, I said, what do you do in a day there's no news? There's no such thing. But as a child, you think one day, what's happened is there's just no news. So my father said, the headline will be that today there's no news.
That's news.
That's the news. So those years, 55, 56, basically when I was born, he began to be an ongoing writer and editor in Tog Morgen Journal. And it was in St. Louis, there's a newspaper was called the Jewish Post and Opinion or something. Anybody knows? St. Louis Jewish. So he was writing. He was a writer. He was very good friends with Elie Wiesel.
From the Elie Wiesel wrote for the Algemeiner Journal?
And for the Forward also, for the Forwards.
Your father wrote for the Forwards?
No, my father. The Forwards was a socialist newspaper.
Right.
There was a Yiddish newspaper called the Yiddish Freiheit. That was a communist newspaper, all daily. That means they had readers. And they were all on East Broadway, down in the Lower East Side. I remember I would sometimes go there. You had all these Yiddish writers. They were all like, Grubbe Jungen, but they were brilliant. Chomping on cigars and whatever. My father was the only Frum Yid with a yarmulke and a beard. But I remember going there. It was an interesting sight. All like the Yiddishists and all these intellectuals that my father hung out with. And Tog Morgen Journal was more the conservative, more, I don't know.
Was it Frum newspaper? No.
It was more conservative. It was more... There were none of them are frum. There was no such thing as like Hamidiya or what you have today. The frum world was very small then, and they didn't have newspapers. But it was Lefi Erech, it was more conservative, more. So my father met Elie Wiesel, and he was a journalist, Elie Wiesel, at the time. And he was a correspondent for Yediot Acharonot. It's relevant, you'll see in a minute, it's connected to the Rebbe. He was a correspondent for Yediot Acharonot, which was the largest daily Israeli newspaper at the time. And in 1959, 1960, he went to publish his book, Night. It's a very famous book in English.
Memoirs. It's his memoir.
Yeah. but that was the book that, put him on the map. So he asked my father to take over his position. So my father at night those days there was no email or anything, so he would call file. They would send it like by telegram, articles. So my father was the correspondent for Yot Achanot in New York, in the UN. And so that just broadened his journalistic connections. And that's what he did. That was his work. He worked for the government for a while as well. So just to give a few little anecdotes about my father and the relationship with the Rebbe.
You said Eli Wiesel, you're connecting it some to the Rebbe?
Yeah, you'll see in a minute, yeah. So this is now early 60s now. The Rebbe was obviously always into really the idea of hafotza, using newspapers. We know even back in Europe, when he was working for the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe himself would publish some of Frierdiker Rebbe's sichos in the newspapers in Warsaw and Warsaw and so on. So the Rebbe was always using newspapers wherever possible to be publicized. Like Nissen Gordon was a colleague of my father's.
He's another Lubavitcher that...
and the Rebbe came out to his Levaya when he wasn't coming out anymore. It was also very machshav him, because he did a lot of good work he would write about the Rebbe, write about Chassidus.
The Rebbe had him when the Frierdiker Rebbe did the citizenship.
Yeah.
The Rebbe made sure that Nissen Gordon was in the room.
Oh, yeah? Yeah. So Nissen Gordon was a son of, I mentioned before, the Gabbai of 770, Rabbi Gershon Gordon. So the early 60s, I don't know, I can't tell you every interaction, like what was the first time the Rebbe spoke to my father about newspapers, I don't really know. But I said like Kovitz Lubavitch, so my father clearly was interacting with the Rebbe. My father was also a Yosem, remember, and the Rebbe, a special kiruv to people who didn't have parents. Because like the Rebbe felt it was, so my father, before getting married, the Rebbe actually called him in, gave him some hadracha, because he didn't have parents. My father went to chuppah without his father and mother. So I'll just say that. So my father, because he had a Yosem, two brothers that were, so Betzalel was already 16, 17. So he was in the dorm in Lubavitch Yeshiva. But Sholem was a 7-year-old boy. So my father asked the Rebbe what to do. He has no parents. The Rebbe said, bring him to New York and the Rebbe told him, hire a family that has a lot of children, pay them to take him in. And the Rebbe said, don't go to family members. Find strangers. Yeah. The obvious reason, the Rebbe didn't say the reason, the obvious is because you don't want to have favors from them and then they'll feel, it's uncomfortable. So my father looked, who's the biggest family in Crown Heights? The Lipskers. They had 9 children. So he went to my grandfather, Yankel Lipsker, in 770 and said to him, he has a 7-year-old boy and he's ready to pay every month, whatever. And my grandfather said from his end, absolutely, but he has to ask his wife. And he went, and my grandmother said immediately, we'll have a 10th child. And they took him in like with all the love. Actually, she probably treated him better than she treated her own children. So my father would go visit him. And of course, there's an eligible bachelor, my father, and there's an eligible oldest daughter of the Lipskers, my mother. So they met. That was the shidduch. And they got married in Tovshin Tazayin. So that's one part of it. The Rebbe was Masada Kedushin. In the early 60s, the first interaction I know that Rebbe with my father was...
interaction, you mean with his work?
Conversation, yeah. Was in the Vatican City of Via Vase, there was what was called the Ecumenical Council. The Catholic Church was going through a whole change of eliminating, officially blaming Jews for killing Yoshka, etc. So my father asked the Rebbe that he's being offered by his newspaper to go fly to Vatican. It was a historic event to Vatican City. Should he go? Because on one hand, Vatican City is Avodah Zarah. So my Rebbe said, absolutely, you should definitely go. And before you go, you should read a lot of books on Catholicism.
Really?
Because they have all these secret ways of doing things. And the more you know, the more they'll trust you, so you'll be able to get more information. That's what Rebbe told me. You should do his research. So my father became an expert I couldn't believe it. Like, and every time, they chose a new Avei. My father knew every secret, like, the white smoke and the blue smoke. I don't want to go into, it's not really the point of that had a podcast, but the Rebbe had this interaction with him, and my father was there for a few weeks, and he covered the story. Another interesting point, Eichmann, in 1961, was caught in Argentina by the Israelis. And the trial of Eichmann was a big thing. My father was the one that broke the story.
In general, in the world?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Because he was inside connections with the Shin Bet and with the...
In the Algemeiner Journal?
Yeah.
That was the Algemeiner Journal.
It was the first one that broke the story. He knew already that they're going to do it, but it was a secret. So as soon as he was able to publicize, he was the first one. He was very well trusted. He was a good journalist. He knew how to get people. He knew. So the Rebbe used my father in that way, in a very more than I know. Even my mother. We don't know as much. The Rebbe would probably speak to my father almost daily. I found this out later.
In person?
No, on the phone. Through Chadakov. Rabbi Chadakov would call. The Rebbe was on the phone. That's usually. But the Rebbe would speak. I'll share a few interesting. This can be itself its own.
No, share. Yeah.
It's Meididik. So. Later, my father didn't talk about it. It was very confidential, everything. But later I found, because the Rebbe saw my father like a trusted source, because my father had connections in Washington, in Israel, in Russia. So my father broke the Eichmann story, and I don't know if my father interacted with the Rebbe on that. I don't know. But with the Vatican City for sure. Then, just to go through a few other parshas, in 1967 was, of course, the Muhammad, Six-Day War. And the Rebbe, that was, of course, a big thing by the Rebbe. After the Six-Day War, my father decided, I'm not sure how it came up, that he wants to go to Egypt. Now, he's a Jewish writer, not just a Jewish writer, with a beer in the yarmulke. You're talking about President Nasser in Egypt was a Rosh Merusha. And my mother said to my father, you're going to go to Egypt? It's a sakana. You can disappear. And where are you, So my father said it would be a real big scoop for him to go. Because right after this, that mamish was the Tovshin Chavches the next year. So my father said, you know what, he'll ask the Rebbe. Why not ask the Rebbe? The Rebbe said, it's a good idea. But because there's sakana involved, the Rebbe gave him a whole bunch of advice. He said, the first thing, as soon as you arrive, go to all the embassies, the American embassy, the French embassy, the Russian, everybody should see you and take pictures with everybody. So in other words, they can't suddenly say he disappeared, because he's here. Go to all the embassies and be very public. Everyone should see you there. That was the Rebbe. Then the Rebbe said, send postcards from Egypt to everyone you know, wherever they may be. So just make sure they know that you're not, they can't just make believe you just, one night. And the Rebbe actually in the Yechidus gave my father 2 pairs of tefillin. I'm not sure what. And he said that when you go there, there's an old Cairo synagogue. There's no one there really. But if you go there, you'll meet a Jew. And he met a Jew there. And he gave him the tefillin, the Rebbe Shlichus. I asked my father, what was this? He said he had no idea, like a tzaddik nister type of thing. So the Rebbe was involved in that sense. And my father went, and it was a big thing. Then he couldn't go from Israel. He went through Cyprus. And then he went back to Cyprus, and from Cyprus he went to Israel, and he was a big hero. Like all the front page newspapers, they had pictures of my father on a camel sitting with his Arab garment, clothing and all that. And he was because he was and he interviewed Nasser. It was a big thing. That's that. Then
some of the individuals that you mentioned, like Eli Wiesel.
I'm going to talk about Eli Wiesel.
And there's other characters that the Rebbe had a whole yachas with.
Natanyal and Mur, that story.
To talk about some of those characters that the Rebbe had yachas, I think was because of your father's. The whole connection.
Yeah. The truth is, we could talk. I want to respect your structure here. I could talk.
I want to hear a little bit more about these characters, and then the Algemeiner, and then we'll move on to Rabbi Simon Jacobson.
No, good. I don't mind any way you want to do it. So Eli Wiesel was very close with my father, really close, and he was very angry and very, the Holocaust had really affected, as he writes, his emunah and all that. And he didn't want to get married. By him it was like God disappeared for him. And my father would always tell him, you can't live that way. And they would have these conversations. And then my father said to him, why don't you go see the Rebbe? He didn't want to go. You have pictures already in Tafshin Chav Gimel. There's a picture of him in a beret sitting behind the Rebbe. You ever see that picture? Very early picture. If you can get a hold of it, it's Kedai. He didn't go to Yechidus yet. He came to farbrengens.
And that was through your father?
Yeah, for sure. Because no, he was not interested. My father said, you should go see the Rebbe. You could talk to the Rebbe openly about all your things. And in Chav Gimel, I think, maybe even earlier, he came to farbrengens. And he wasn't yet so famous. He was just beginning to. And then over the next few years, again, I don't know the whole Ishtalshalos really, but at some point there was a Yechidus, a famous Yechidus, and then there's the follow-up letters that are printed today. My father was the one that orchestrated it, meaning got him to go, and then the rest is history. Basically, the Rebbe telling him that you're creating a second Holocaust. You're doing what Hitler wanted. There shouldn't be a continuation. And the Rebbe persuaded him. And then wrote him this long letter in Yiddish. We have this long letter. It's printed. Beautiful letter, like a real chizuk. And that's when they connected. He tells the story that he's a Vishnitzer. The Rebbe said, Chabad, say L'chaim. Then he came to farbrengens. I remember the farbrengen Lamed Aleph, Simchas Torah, the second farbrengen, Shabbos Bereshis. After Yontif, he came to that farbrengen. That's when the Rebbe spoke an hour sikha on the Holocaust. It was because of him. Yeah, he spoke about how do you address it. I used it also, that sikha in my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, because very sadistic, the whole Rebbe's hashkafa and steak, hachol machshava, and yet we have tainas, you don't have to defend Eibush. All the Rebbe's hashkafa was definitely, he was there. Which was not uncommon. When there was a writer or something that Rebbe
famous with Chaim Potak.
Yeah, exactly. So my father was instrumental in many cases like this. I'll give you another story, for example. He was a rabbi in Queens, the largest young Israel in Queens. He was the head of the RCA, which is the Stadras Rabbanim of, the YU Rabbanim. If I know the name, it's a famous name. When my father passed away, then I heard a lot more stories because people came Shiva. So this rabbi came, he was already older, and he told me, not Hollander, no. What? Not Hollander. Famous name, not Hollander. Who? Not Bamser either, no. This is the common Chabad friendly rabbi.
Bamser.
Yeah. No, there's another one. It's a lesser. It'll come to me or it won't come to me, but we'll stick it in somewhere. But it was very fascinating. He said to me that around Tafshin Chavav or Chav Zayin, the Stadras Rabbanim, called the RCA, Rabbinical Council of America or something, wanted to come out with a macha about something the Rebbe did. I don't know what. Like something the Rebbe said that they didn't agree with. And they were going to come out with it publicly, like that they disagree with the Lubavitch Rebbe. And he says, your father called me, because he knew me well. And he says, before you come out, why don't you talk to the Rebbe? Maybe you can resolve it without coming out. He says, the Rebbe's going to talk to me? The Rebbe does everything on his own. He doesn't talk to anyone. He says, no, I'll talk to you. We'll schedule it. So my father got him a Yechidus. He went to Yechidus. And he told me himself. He said, and everything was resolved. They discussed it. And he came back to it, he says, we resolved it.
There's no issue here.
So it was not even, we don't even know something. So he says to me, you can't know how many things your father prevented behind, back, what they call back and diplomacy. Back channel diplomacy. Because that was one. He says there were others also. Because he knew a lot of people, so he was able to diffuse things that could have been against some ice. So this was what he told me, which was very interesting. So, and my father didn't talk about much. So I don't know how many, but there's no question that he was like a liaison. I do know this, that anything happened in the news, he'd get a call right away from Rabbi Chadakov to double check what's going on. So he was like, I'm not saying he was the only source, but he was one of the main sources for the Rebbe.
So he was the Rebbe's man in the journalistic.
Yeah, like especially Israel. I'll soon share about the diplomats. He would bring some chastera. So this was those years. Wiesel I mentioned, and Tovshin Lamed Beis is the next. Well, Lamed Aleph I should mention quickly. Many people know these stories because my father publicized them. I've shared them. Lamed Aleph, he went to Russia. Again, the Rebbe gave him, he had a long yechidus with the Rebbe. Russia was very tough then on the Yidden. A year later, they would start letting them out. But Lamed Aleph, Brezhnev was so my father went. My father spoke fluent Russian. So nobody trusted him.
Was he a Russian citizen?
I don't know if he was a Russian citizen anymore, but...
he was able to go?
Yeah, for sure. As a journalist. And nobody trusted him. The Russians thought that he was an Israeli spy. The Chassidim thought he was a Russian spy because he spoke all these. So it was a ganze parsha. But he ended up going, and the Rebbe gave him a lot of shlichus in there because there were a lot of Russian Jews. And the Rebbe told him, this we could talk for an hour, just for the record. The Rebbe told me, you come back, come right into Yechidus to me because I want to hear a Varma Gris from the Russian. So the Rebbe said, very close to my heart. I mean, no, the Rebbe would talk about them all the time. So that's what happened. The Rebbe, then my father had a Yechidus, so famous Yechidus, all night, from 11 p.m. till 6 a.m. 7-hour Yechidus when he came back. And it's an unbelievable Yechidus. Most of it is Mefursum already. It probably deserves its own parsha. The Rebbe spoke, my father gave the Rebbe the panim, the tzetlach, that the Russian Yid, remember it was a prison, you couldn't write in America, and they all wrote Taira, Tata, Feta, Zayda, they couldn't write Rebbe. And when the Rebbe got, my father gave him like a few hundred of such notes. When the Rebbe took it, like my father said, the Rebbe was holding it like a child. Like it was like and the Rebbe started reading slowly. It was like tied up, and the Rebbe started reading very slowly, and the Rebbe started crying. So my father felt very uncomfortable. He's standing there. So he decided to edge himself out, to go out of the room. When the Rebbe wants him back, he'll come back. He doesn't know, So my father's about to make his escape, And the Rebbe said, made like this to him, you should stand. So he stood in the corner. He says it was a sight like being a Kedesh Kedoshim, the Rebbe crying like a baby, reading the notes from the Russian, because they poured their hearts out. So it was a Yechidus of that nature, very emotional. And at the end of that Yechidus, the Rebbe looked out the window, and it was starting to get light outside. And the Rebbe stood up. My father said the Rebbe was like fresh, like the night didn't even pass. And that's when the Rebbe said, a famous ending of the Yechidus, he said, Anaya Tog. That's what the Rebbe said. He saw the light. And so you could touch a lot of Perushim in that, because after they spoke about a lot of Shvera Zachen, dark things, and the Rebbe said, Anaya Tog. I remember because when my father came home, he said, I'll tell you what the last thing the Rebbe said, Anaya Tog. Anaya Tog. That there's always a new day, a new hope. Lamed Aleph, Lamed Beis, Algemeiner Journal, the owner, his name was Jacobs, closes down the Algemeiner Journal, doesn't tell anybody, it's closed. My father comes home middle of the day. I never saw my father even at night, let alone middle of the day. My father was very dramatic. He says to me, I'm out of a job. I said, what does that mean, Ta? I thought, are we going to lose the house? Are we going to live in the street? He says, no, not exactly, but he made it like I thought, out of a job. And then the Algemeiner was born. And
when he was born, what happened?
There was a conception and a birth.
Wasn't there some?
Just kidding. Like babies are born. I'll tell you. I'm going to tell you. Relax. So the Algemeiner Journal was closed. It was a big shock for the whole Jewish community because it was without warning. The Farbrengens was owned by the radio stations. They had a lot of money. The unions were killing it, and there were less and less Yiddish readers. There's many reasons. And my father He was a young man. He was a Lamed Beis. He was born Tzadik Dalet. That would make him what in Lamed Beis?
You're the math major, no?
I am. Okay. So let me count. Tzadik Beis, Tzadik Dalet. Yeah. Tzadik Dalet is okay. Whatever. He was 38 years old. So he right away felt he wants to do something, but he didn't have money. And the Rebbe was a big encourager. The Rebbe right away said, there's a lot of stories. The Rebbe then, the Satmar Chassidim opened the Zeitung right away. And the Rebbe said, Zeh Rebbe is in Miami, und sie haben schon gemacht die Zeitung. Und da, the Rebbe says, I'm here and nothing's happening.
But I think their newspaper was a Satmar newspaper. Algemeiner was supposed to be a Lubavitch newspaper?
Oh, I'll share exactly what happened. So the Rebbe was encouraging it a lot. My father needed some money, a little, so then a few people came together. Mendel Shem Tov was one. He brought a few partners of his, not Lubavitch, Zeldis, and a few people. I remember Michal Teitelbaum and Leibel Mochkin owned the building. So they put the building up, whatever. They put together $30,000 maybe. And that was relatively a lot.
Nice money.
But they weren't looking to make money. It was just to get it going. You need something.
It was a pu'ula.
Yeah, it was. And my father was the person, the editor, and the publisher. And so a lot of stories about this, but just to briefly asked about, my father asked the Rebbe, does he want a Lubavitch Zeitung? So the Rebbe laughed and said, a Lubavitch Zeitung is a dover v'yifuche. He said, Lubavitch's inyan is Yefutze meine Sache chutza. A Zeitung's inyan is zu kriegen was mehr Leiner und Abonnenten, which means subscribers, and to get, it's two different objectives. So
why are they different?
Because then the whole newspaper is not for Yefutze meine Sache chutza. You have to do other things.
So
and Chabad and Lubavitch
to intrigue other people, to intrigue readers, you need to write things that are not necessarily in line with Yefutze meine Sache chutza.
Exactly, and it's also not the mission of the newspaper. For the mission of the newspaper, then it's more of it would be more like like exactly. Good, very good, exactly, right. And it wouldn't be credible. It would be seen as a Chabad propaganda, Chabad teachings. And it's not a newspaper, basically. And then a few other things. My father, just to give another story, a good one with the Rebbe. My father says some Askarim are saying that the newspaper needs a vad, Vada Bekeris, censorship bureau. And people who look at all the articles...
Like a ruchnistic?
No, to make sure all the articles are right, the ads, it's all al-pi, halacha...
Jewish, spiritually.
Yeah, exactly. So my father said to the Askanim, I'll ask the Rebbe. I don't need the Hashoris. So my father asked the Rebbe whether the Rebbe thinks there should be a vad, like Rabbonim or Mashpiyim, whatever. So the Rebbe said, was to tun, what will you do if they tell you to close the newspaper? So my father said, the Rebbe says I should get them and I have to listen to them. I'll do it. I'll listen. So the Rebbe then picked up his hands like this and he said, was? We come in Rabbonim and we come in mentions of Rabbonim. That was the Reden wegen Zeitung. I Rav Daf Paskin that Eid has to learn Torah 24/7. And 1 second that he doesn't is Bittul Torah. Reading a newspaper is Bittul Torah. So how could a Rav give a hechsher for Bittul Torah, even if it's kosher articles? That's what the Rebbe said. He said, Zeitung is for Eden was folgen nicht Rabbonim. Or there was fragen nicht Rabbonim. A newspaper is for Jews that don't ask Rabbonim, don't listen to Rabbonim or don't ask Rabbonim. And then when you put in a word from Torah or the Chassidus in such a place, you're reaching even such Jews.
Rebbe liked talking about Zeitung.
That's what he said.
No, you read a Zeitung before davening and like the American
Jews.
Rebbe liked picking on the reading newspapers.
He said New York Times, when the motivations what this is, Tovei Alecha Bracha, like that. So you see the Rebbe is like, not just common sense, the wisdom. The Rebbe was not saying have a newspaper that's Hepech Halach. It's not, Halacha says you should learn Torah. So that was the Rebbe's approach to it. And that's when the Rebbe told my father the story actually, that when he was in Warsaw, the Frierdiker Rebbe says, the Shver told me to go find a newspaper to print the Likutei Diburim. So he said, I went to look, and I came back with a list of 4 newspapers. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, ganz Varsha, you don't know 4 Zeitungen, Yiddish, because Varsha was like 1 million Jews before the war. So the Rebbe said to him, the Frierdiker Rebbe, he's telling this to my father, das ist eine Frumme Zeitung. So the Frierdiker Rebbe started laughing, he said, Frumme Jiden kommen legen die Kuntresim in the Stiblach. Da verstehen kein Zeitung. I want to reach Jews that don't go to Stiblach. So my father said, so which newspaper did you find? So the Rebbe said, we found a liberale, socialistische, one of these socialist newspapers. So the Rebbe was pointing out that there's different kibbushim. It's not, you want to have a kuntres and Teda, a Kavit Teda, that's one thing. This is a newspaper. The Rebbe also gave the name Algemeiner. That was the Rebbe.
Yeah, the name.
Yeah. My father asked the Rebbe why.
Algemeiner Journal.
Algemeiner Journal. And my father asked the Rebbe why. Because Algemeiner is like saying like general newspaper, or, it's a strange name. So the Rebbe said, that's what a Zeitung. That was ein Keil Hakel, Algemein, Alts. So the Rebbe said, then my father asked, should it be Algemeine Wöchentliche Zeitung? Because weekly, because Tag Morgen Journal was daily. So the Rebbe said to him, was darf es Magbil sein, Savoch? So I remember my father saying to me, what is the Rebbe thinking, that there's going to grow Yiddish readers? So I said, I don't know. And today, with internet, you can't even call it daily, because you update it every minute. And the Rebbe said, why do you have to be Magbil it?
So there was English right away also?
No.
That was later.
That came later. Another outstanding thing that I can mention is, so the Algemeiner became for the Rebbe I think from then on, the Kiruvim dramatically changed. My father became even more closer to the Rebbe, because it was like, he was the publisher. At the end
of the day, it's not a Lubavitch newspaper, but whenever the Rebbe came out with a mitzvah, whenever there's there was major coverage.
But remember, the credibility was that it wasn't being paid by Lubavitch to publicize the Rebbe. My father was independent.
Right. And it was news.
And my father independently chose to do it, so it has a different meaning than...
Did right away start with the Sichos?
No, Meir Blau came later, a few years later, started the Teda Gedanken. Yeah. And there's a lot to say about this, but I'll just say one thing. The Yom Kippur War was a Lamed Dalet, right? So Yom Kippur War... my father was, of course, covering. The Rebbe went out. There was a levaya before Sukkot, and the Rebbe went to be Melave. On the way back, the Bochum from that time will tell you the story. On the way back, the Rebbe saw my father standing there. He called him over, and he began to talk to him as he's walking back from Kingston to the 770. And he ended up talking to my father like 20 minutes, and he gave him a full interview. He said it's an interview. So my father made a special, the newspaper was once a week, that week it came out twice, with a full interview, front page, exclusive interview with the Lubavitch Rebbe. And that's when the Rebbe said to my father, later he would say it in the farbrengens, that they should conquer Damascus and Cairo. The Rebbe in the Sikha, the Chalamet Sukkah Sikha, and Erev Sukkah Sikha, the Rebbe speaks about it. The Sima Masechta Chala. So the Rebbe, that was like a full interview. That was like seen on the street. The Rebbe spoke to my father like 20 minutes, and he published the whole thing. And then over the years, this became I told you, I know maybe 10% of it, because it was ongoing. People, I will correct a few people think that the Rebbe was Magia every article. It's not correct. When my father wrote something that the Rebbe said in the farbrengens, he would often send it into the Rebbe to make sure it's accurate. And the Rebbe was often Magia that. But overall, my father didn't take dictation from the Rebbe what to write. My father was a smart man. He understood the Rebbe's Shitta and Ashkafa, and he presented it. And there were also controversial things. There was a guy, some weirdo, that decided to put an ad in the Algemeiner and signed it 770 Eastern Parkway. And the Rebbe would get the first newspaper. They bring the Erste Even, so to speak. Wednesday night, they would deliver right to the Rebbe. The Rebbe saw this ad. My father got a call within minutes from Rabbi Chadakov, who put an ad 770 Eastern Parkway. It was like some strange ad. I don't even know what it was for. My father said, I thought it was cleared by, from you. So he says, no. But the newspaper was already printed, but it was not delivered to the newsstands yet. So my father called them, they threw them all out. And they got rid of the ad, they changed it, and they reprinted the whole newspaper. There were some events like that. There was another example story, was a guy called Shlomo Shamir, was a writer in Algemeiner, and he was his grandfather was a gabbai by the Gerer Rebbe. So he came from Gerer Chassidim. But he was like more liberal and more secular. So the Rebbe was very strong behind Tainus Shas. There was a few Tainus Shas for Eretz Yisrael in Mamalev, and a few other times. So he wrote an article criticizing the Tainus Shas, saying, what's maintenance of things? That's just all. You need an army, you need to be smart. What's a Tainus? You live fast and think it's going to save Israel. The Rebbe by the next farbrengens.
So you're saying that there was no censorship, like your father allowed an article that was criticized.
He didn't say the Rebbe, he didn't mention the Rebbe. He mentioned because it was like Gudis Harabanim officially,
right?
But the Rebbe was behind it.
Okay.
So he didn't mention the Rebbe. He didn't mention any names. He just said, what do they think, that they're going to make a tainus? Yeah, my father published it. And also he was a weekly columnist. My father, you can't tell a weekly columnist, you write this. And the Rebbe was fine with that. I'll show you what happened. The Rebbe yelled by the farbrengen about it. Kum ta'id, the Rebbe said, kum for chassidische mishpache, wie schreibt es Aid, as teire ruchni is hat nicht kein shaykh Sid, like the Rebbe was very upset about it. And my father was sitting at the farbrengen. At the end of the farbrengen, if I may say this, Rabbi Yel goes over to my father, menuvel, because he caused the Rebbe agmas nefesh. My father wasn't happy, so my father wrote to the Rebbe that he apologizes, that he aggravated the Rebbe. And the Rebbe wrote back to him, or said it balpeh, I'm not sure. The Rebbe said, du darfst tun deinen, ich darf tun meinen. Du bist a drucker, as a doctor, you're a publisher of a newspaper, you have a columnist, you can't tell him not to write something. And I do my in. The next week, my father wrote an article criticizing Shamir. That he could do. That's the way you do it in a journalist. You can't, because then the newspaper loses its
credibility.
Yeah, so that's another pasha. And then there's the famous Natanyal and Mur story. I don't know if you want to go into that, because I did a few gems on that.
And you said there was Israeli diplomats?
Oh, yeah. Those are the two things. Natanyal and Mur is a longer story. He was like a writer for the Algemeiner, but also a very anti-Israel. It's a famous story by Keshel Bracha.
Say it.
You want me to tell it?
Yeah.
Okay. So briefly, Natanyal and Mur was actually came from, before the war, he came from Poland. He was a knowledgeable guy. He was one of who was the most aggressive? There was Haganah, there was Lehi, and there was the Stern Gang. Yeah, they were the Irgun. He was from the very radical anti-British. They bombed King David Hotel, etc. So he was a big, big Zionist. But then when the country became the state of Israel, was founded in 1948, he saw the politics and the corruption, so he became very anti. Because he was more of an ideological type of Zionist. And he became very unfortunately, pro-Palestinian, or whatever you want to call it, pro-Arab. And he would write these articles that people were furious. So my father, in a colorful way, decided a perfect writer for the Algemeiner, Now, he wrote a lot of beautiful articles. He was a good writer. But from time to time, so my father contacted him. He knew him. I said he wrote a beautiful Yiddish. Would you want to be a columnist? So he said, you know what I write about? He says, yeah. So people can criticize it. So my father, he became a writer. So I'm not saying every month. Once every few months, he got an article that my father got all the hate mail. How do you print such articles? Whatever. You could say it was it sold newspapers. Okay, you want to say
That's
that?
What I was thinking.
Yeah, I know how Chabad people think. I grew up. I have a soft spot for Chabad. So anyway, but the story that comes out of this may be worth the whole parsha. But he was also very anti-religious, because he was very anti-religious. Even though he was a Yedei Sefer, but. My father never would push anything on him, but one day, I guess my father had, I say to this, Rosh Hashanah Tovshin Lamed Vov. So Natanyal and Mur was in New York. He was traveling. So my father says to him, after Rosh Hashanah, the Lubavitch Rebbe gives Keshel Bracha. Maybe you want to come. You'll drive from Manhattan after Yom Tov, and we'll go. I'll take you. he started laughing and it's ridiculous. He says, what's a Rebbe? I never saw, he didn't look at a Rebbe already 30 years. He was like, so he says, no, the Rebbe's, it's worthwhile. You're in New York, it's a good place. It's like the same idea, like my father introduced people. So after a while, Tanya, okay, fine. He says, will the Rebbe accept me? He'll know what I write about. He knew that. So my father says, we'll see, you'll see. No one's going to hurt you. Don't be afraid. They come to Kesha Bracha. They go by, and the Rebbe, my father tells the Rebbe, Natanya and more. This is mamish. Firstly, we have the story. He himself wrote it. So this is like, Bodik, it's not a rumor. It's not one of those. So the Rebbe says to Natanya, ich lein doch eure Artikeln jede Woche. I read your articles every week. Okay, so first of all, a Rebbe reading articles, and his articles, so like he was like all confused. And then the Rebbe says to him, the Rebbe Ebrish to bench Hashem, I'll say it in English, I'll say, when God blesses someone with a chush, a kishin, or chush aksiva, to write, you have to use it out to the fullest. So you have a column, your column has to always be filled with your words. Every week you have to write. If you don't, you're not using out the Ebrish's keches. That's what the Rebbe tells him. He was like now completely like, So he says to the Rebbe is masking mit alles was ich schreibe. Because he's thinking the Rebbe is reading and giving him a bracha like this. The Rebbe agrees with everything I write. So the Rebbe says, you don't have to agree with everything you read. You have to continue writing, and sof kol sof, you'll come to the emes. So the Rebbe tells him. Now he was really now like very flattered, of course, and the Rebbe's taking the time. Remember, in Kesha Bracha, the Rebbe didn't have conversations. It was very rare. And my father was standing on the side. I heard the story straight from him afterwards. He came to our house. Lamed Vov. And then the Rebbe says to him like this. I have to say it in Yiddish. He said, Von Menschen weiß ich, du hast nicht gemäht. Ich will wissen, so hast mehr für neighbors. For people I know you're not afraid of. Because, he wrote but I want to know if you have Yiras Shammai, any fear of Hashem. So when he told the story, he said, he didn't want to lie and say, yeah, zicher, like that. And he also didn't want to say the truth. It was respectful. He didn't want to say that, Rebbe, I don't believe in this Eibishter. So he said, tracht, a Jew thinks. That's how he answered. A Jew's thinking. Like a say. So the Rebbe said, Leha medrash ikar ela ma'aser. Thinking is not enough. Ma'aser or ikar. I'm asking you an action, not what you're thinking. So then he responded like this. He said, Abi ich ma'azeh v'derid in the ma'aser mit Levi Yitzchak bar Ditchever. That's how he answered. At least I'm like the Jew in the story of Levi Yitzchak bar Ditchever. Now he didn't tell the story, but the Rebbe right away knew what story he meant. So I have to share the story. The story is the Yid that was smoking on Shabbos. Levi Yitzchak bar Ditchever said, you probably don't know it's Shabbos today. He said, I know it's Shabbos. You probably don't know you're not allowed to smoke. He says, I know you're not allowed to smoke. And that's lahachis, Shabbos, and smoking. I'm doing it. So Levi Yitzchak bar Ditchever was, because the Malamed Schuz, the male initiation of Yidden, turns to the Eibishter, gib a cook, I eat, will nicht sagen, kein liegen. The Jew doesn't want to lie. So this was he's telling the Rebbe, at least I'm like that. At least I'm not lying to you. And he said, the Rebbe, without missing a beat, said to him, the Unterschied is, as Levi Yitzchak, the bar Ditchever wird geredet wegen der zweiten Niden, und du das wegen sich. That's what the Rebbe said. He was like, that Levi Yitzchak bar Ditchever was being Malamed Schus on someone else, and you're talking about yourself. He was like, it reminds me of the Sikha. He was so, what was Sikha? It reminds me of the Sikha that the Rebbe says, but the Rebbe says the Ma'aser of Yitzchak bar Ditchever, that the guy was smearing the reddes with jagachs. Yeah.
And the Rebbe says, that doesn't mean it's a hira, in the middle of davening, you have to go and smear the reddes with jagachs. Yeah. Anyway, he was so blown away by that, the Rebbe's chachma and how he talked to him. Like, the Rebbe didn't yell at him, how could you write such articles, like most people would do. I remember he told the story, he was very moved. I could see he was like transformed even. But the story's not over. He was so intrigued, he decided he's coming back Erev Yom Kippur for lekach. The Rebbe was giving lekach then. And he comes back. He goes by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says to him, I hope you're not going to turn me into a Rosha. He
He says to the Rebbe, how could I turn the Rebbe? The Rebbe says, how could I turn the Rebbe into a Rosh? Who am I to turn the Rebbe? The Rebbe said, the Gemara says that if you speak Dvarim B'Teilim, you're like a Rosh. If you don't continue writing your column, then what I said to you, Rosh Hashanah would be Dvarim B'Teilim. So you turn me into a Rosh. So he says, I promise the Rebbe, I'm not turning the Rebbe into a Rosh. I'll always continue to write. This is the Rebbe's, there's so many Heiras just from this story. It's unbelievable. Okay, the story's not over. This is Lamed Vav. Around 3 years later, Lamed Ches or Lamed Tes. Unfortunately, he tells my father that he has Yena Machla, and the doctors give him only 6 months. And he sends my father 2 envelopes to be published posthumously after he passes away. He did pass away, unfortunately, and my father honored his request, and he printed the articles. And the first article, the second is more about his life. The first one, he writes like this. He writes, in Yiddish, dear reader, as you're reading this article, I'm being done, they're judging me in Bezdin Shalmaila. And they're reading, and I know I did not live the life of a Jew, and I'm sure they're reading me a list of chvezvas, what I've done. And I don't know if they're going to give me any time to defend myself or to make my case. But I know everything they read that is read below is read above. That's what he writes. So B'Mela, he's writing this article he wanted to be published after he's not here, when he's Ilmaila. So this will be his statement for the Bezdin Shalmaila. This is what this person is writing. So he says, I don't have many shchusim, but one I have is that Lubavitch Rebbe told me I have a kishin to write, and that I should promise him to always write my column. So I'm writing my column, my final column here. This is the story. What do you think? So Maisa Shahaya. So now Jem contacted me a few years ago. I chazared the story many times in my talks, and Jem said to me, they believed the story, but they wanted more evidence, So I said, first of all, the article, he printed the article. They can't find the articles. But they did find, first of all, there's a picture of the Rebbe and him by Kesha Bracha. And then they found Freden, Levi Yitzchak Freden, took a video. So they have clips. But Freden didn't take full videos. He only took clips. And they hear the Rebbe saying, they hear the words Levi Yitzchak Baditsheva. So they knew that there's definitely, and they see clearly that Rebbe standing and talking to him for not 30 seconds. So everyone knew something had happened, but they wanted, so I said, so let's just find the article and you just print it's closed. He wrote it himself. And then we finally found that my father writes, next week we'll publish the article, but we didn't find it next week. So I said, let's look next year. Maybe for some reason my father probably couldn't print it, so that by his yard site next year, they found both articles. Yes. So it was, so then I did like 2 living Torahs just on this. It's an unbelievable story in so many ways. So this was a little taste of Gershon Ber Jacobson.
I think it will be a sin to talk about the Algemeiner if you don't speak about the Meisim Defeifen.
Okay, that's Lamed Vav. Also that same year. Yeah, so my father, after Tishrei, Cheshvan Lamed Vav, my father printed a picture of the Rebbe with 2 fingers, the famous picture.
Motioning to whistle.
Yeah. But the 2 fingers are in the Rebbe's mouth. It's not just... and this I remember, I was 19 already. I was a Bach in 770. And my father comes Friday night to shul. And I see everyone, he's attacked by Gan Spitz Chabad, I'm going to say all the names, and they attack, people yelling at him. Chutzpah to print the Rebbe, a picture like the Rebbe, Pfeifen, this, just pasnished. My father was like, he was perplexed, was bothering them. He did not just there was a disagreement. He didn't even understand. The Rebbe, it's Dir Berabim by Kishal Bracha. It's not like some secret picture from Mechvezvu. Not everyone. There were people who that said absolutely, but there were people, they attacked him. My father was not a guy you could intimidate. But he was uncomfortable, obviously, because they were yelling at him. So he said, like my father would always say, Schreib a brief zum Redaktie. Write a letter to the editor. That's what he always would say. I use that also when people have comments. I say, write a letter to the editor. And you're the editor, so write a letter, And what did my father do? So they wrote a letter that in the name of Tzendika Tezen Techsidim, they're making a machor for Hashem, Chabad, whatever. So my father, in classic style, what did he do? He prints the letter, prints a picture of the guy that wrote the letter, prints a picture of himself, because he's being criticized, and prints a picture of the Rebbe Pfeiffer again. So people should see the full story. This is my father. This is classic, It's a story. And he writes, B'Shem Tzendika Tezen Techsidim. Now the Rebbe saw all this, but he didn't react. It's Cheshvan Lamed Vav. So it goes Kislev, Teves, Shvat, 4 months later. In Mitten, I think the 6th or 7th Sikh, Purim Lamed Vav. You could all hear it. Amaisa mit Pfeifen. That's how the Rebbe started. Amaisa mit Pfeifen. And you can read the Sikh, it speaks for itself. The Rebbe did not like the protest. That's when he brought Mecharker, Mefazer, Mecharker, B'chol Eiz, that Michal Bashol also had the same problem. Pasnish for David HaMelech is making somersaults, etc. And the Rebbe said, a 5 for Kedusha, the whole thing. What I will say on this is this, I'm an Ageba Dov, it's my father. But I knew my father very well. He was a very intelligent man. He understood the Rebbe's approach extremely well. Kamuvan, he's a Shkias Miyov, and everyone makes mistakes. But I printed a picture of the Rebbe Pfeiffer in Berabim. Was not, today most people would say the Rebbe did it. It's not like we have nothing to hide. He was Mechavan, and the Chassidim were still, old school. The same thing happened, by the way, with the Rebbetzins' pictures, Memches. Also, my father got from Yitzke Gansberg a bunch of pictures the day of her wedding, Yudal Kislev, and he printed a whole spread after the Hirstalkus.
A few pictures.
Yeah, a few pictures. And there was also, people complained. That was less, but still there were people saying, how do you print pictures? Like, is it Rebbetzin? I remember my father saying, well, you want a Rebbetzin has to look like a Satmar Rebbetzin? We have a beautiful Rebbetzin. What's wrong with having a beautiful Rebbetzin? Eishes Chayil, But whatever. And here too, my father didn't have an issue. First of all, it's a newspaper. He's not printing B'Shem Chabad. If it's his mistake, it's his achrais. It's not like, it's not a kohos, with the Ema Malko, there was the whole parsha there.
It's the answer.
Yeah, it's a sinner, right. The whole thing. And even there, the Rebbe did.
Yemenu Hamalko.
Huh?
Yemenu Hamalko.
Right, Yemenu Hamalko. And there's that settle with the Rebbe, explains.
The Rebbe explains that.
Yeah. But then he gave it also to the Bachar. Yeah. But my father's not a Yeshiva Bachar, So after Shiva, after the Rebbe stood up from Shiva, the Rebbe called in 3 people to his room in the house. He called in Yudel, called Zalman and called my father. And the Rebbe gave my father $470, Gematria Chaimushka, and gave him a Yeshri Kayach for the article and the pictures. So my father said to the Rebbe, nicht alle sind gewinnt zufrieden mit them. And that's when the Rebbe said to him, he says, the Rebbe said to him, nicht alle sind zufrieden, das ist ein gutes Simen. The Rebbe said he should print more. So next week was another spread. Yeah. The Rebbe saw it as covered ha-nifteres. The Rebbe once told my father that my father said people say the newspaper is nicht genug frum. And the Rebbe said, Mistame da andere was sagen sie zu frum. That's the story. So that's a little picture. But in between, over and under, my father was involved in so many things. I heard, after my father passed away, Binyamin Klein and Yudel and Label told me, whatever everyone knows, there's even more. My father had a mini stroke in Tov Shemem Hey, I think it was. Yeah. Before Pesach. And my father went by for matzah. The Rebbe wasn't giving matzah yet. He was giving through the Koil Yungelite. But my father got full matzahs and everything. My father walks by, and he was very depressed and also weak, And my shwager, Beryl Gansberg, was standing behind my father because he was a Koil Yungelite. And the Rebbe sees my father like this, and he says, "Was is?" Gershon Ber, he said, "What's bothering you?" He says, "Ich kann gar nicht tun." It's my father, like he said, "Ich kann gar nicht tun." I can't do anything. Like he's weak. And the Rebbe put down the matzahs. The Rebbe raised his hands. He says, Ich bin älter für euch und ich tu alles. I'm older than you and I do everything. That's one nice story. The final one, I'll say, well, fine, we can talk, as I said, I can go on and on. Tovshin Nun. Erev, Tovshin Nun was the only time that Rebbe farbrengen the first day Rosh Hashanah also. My father was in the hospital then, because he had diabetes. He was in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in the hospital then. By the farbrengen Rosh Hashanah, the first day, which was never. I think only maybe the first year the Rebbe spoke a little, but the farbrengen was only then. So middle of farbrengen, the Rebbe looked for me, because it was a surprise farbrengen, so I was sitting, like was right under the Rebbe's table. So the Rebbe wanted me to say L'chaim. I said L'chaim. Rebbe Grona told me later, off the record, this farbrengen was a source of your father. Mm. I didn't ask him how he knows, but that's what he told me. So, which was not a pella, because my father had this, the Rebbe was machshiv, not him, but he did, his position, So, but listen to the story. Erev Yom Kippur, suddenly everyone's calling me. I don't know where I was. My wife is calling me, my office is calling me, my brother's calling me. Rebbe Grona is desperate, the Rebbe wants to see you. Erev Yom Kippur. So I come running. The Rebbe comes out to Gan Eden Tachten, and he gives me 2 pieces of lekach, and he tells me, Van Taten, a sweet and healthy year. And then he says, with a smile, Zog dem Taten, as verendig in de Schliches, was mit dem geschickten Spital, wird man ihm von dort nach Reis lassen. That if he finishes the Schliches for which he was sent to the hospital, they'll release him. So he was in the NYU hospital, and was in First Avenue and in 20s. I ran, I took a cab, I remember, and I went there right away, I brought the cake, and I told my father. My mother started running around doing mivtzoyim. My father called her back, he said, it's my shlichus, not your shlichus. You're a visitor here. And I don't know what my father did. He probably did his things, talking to doctors. But Ad Kadei Kach, Rabbi Chadakov was very, very old then. He was not weak now. The day after Yom Kippur, he visits my father. The Rebbe asks, Seat Shem Farendig the Shlichus. Second, yeah. And so I made a dicker story, I think. I tell the story a lot because it's the Rebbe's attitude that even who ends up in a hospital, who goes on a hospital to Shlichus? You go to the hospital because you have no choice. Oh. But the Rebbe sees everything as a Shlichus. Right. So that's a little taste of...
And that's the whole story of your father.
Yeah.
He had a talent to be a journalist, and the Rebbe made it to Shlichus.
Yeah. I'm very proud of, obviously, but I know that, people see it's like I'm subjective a bit, but he brought the Rebbe a lot of, he was a warrior. I didn't even go through the Parsha of Satmar and Aguda, that's a whole other story. I don't know if you guys know the story with the Satmar started attacking the Rebbe, he went to war. And I think that was where he was zeichet to his biggest kiruvim, because he mamish was Mesa Nefesh. My father lost. They used to send us. They terrorized my father. They beat him up. They beat him up in Satmar Shul once. But he was this was the late Lamids.
Talucha and the whole thing.
Yeah, the Talucha, the pogrom, and my father was the central figure there, because every week he called them the Fasam Tamais, the poisoned mice. He brought them to their knees. He was mamish went to war. And I know the Rebbe was behind, it was machos. I don't know, want me to talk about it?
Yeah.
Okay. It's fine. So, you probably know, of course, Satmar Shittis about Israel. And even though the Satmar Rav and the Rebbe did see each other, Tavshin Chav Hei and Tavshin Yud Gimel and so on, but as the years passed, the tensions rose, especially after the 6-Day War, when the Satmar came out with Alagula of Al Tmura, attacking the 6-Day War as Maisa Sutton, and not allowed to go to the Kaisel. So you can imagine, and Chabad Shita was very different. But it really exploded in Tebi, in Lamed Vov. Where the Rebbe said it can make Birchas Hanisim, Mamish Maisa Nisim, and the Satmar went crazy. By them it was Peshi Yisrael, no. The Rebbe said, what do you mean? A doctor saves your life. It doesn't matter if he's from, not from. The whole thing, the Skissel, the Rebbe asked the 3 questions, the Rabbonim, you know that Pasha, right? I'm not going through all the details, but bottom line is that they then began to do their Satmishtik, real terrorism. They printed then a kavitz, I don't even want to repeat it, the worst possible thing you could write about the Rebbe. I mean, like Mamash Pashkvil, the Pashkvil came out then. And then I was on the mitzvah tank when they almost turned over a mitzvah tank in Williamsburg. Put him,
you were on the tank?
I was on the first tank. It happened twice. They almost turned it over and they were burning the Rebbe in effigy. I mean, I didn't want to repeat it, such a busha, but I have to say it for the story. They did things, Mamash Chilal, in the worst part, Chilal Kodesh, things you hear. I mean, later they would throw a dead dog in the oil. That was a little later. The things, Mamash behavior of Nazis. The guys that cut the beard of Mendel Wechter, and the same thing with Pinyakorov. And the Rebbe was their target. So my father began to go, he had the newspaper, every week he would attack them. And for them that was the worst, because it's bad, they wanted a good name. He attacked them, they say, why are you attacking? There's a few terrorists. Yeah, a few terrorists. He went to war against them. Every week in the Algemeiner, 10 pages maybe, 10 full pages of protests. Gershon Mendel was involved. They got every Rav from Antwerp to Chvezvu. Macha of the Bizayin HaKadosh of the Rebbe.
Of the Rebbe, or what was the shayness?
No, it was the Rebbe. It was all covered of the Rebbe. Because they were bevaz of the Rebbe directly. Pictures, in the worst possible way. It was a real war. But media, my father, Algemeiner was a very big newspaper then. It was very popular. It was the only, there was no Amis and there was no Amidias, there was no Ted Naaman. There was Jewish press and there was the Algemeiner.
As Gimel Tammuz approaches, many will be donating to Keren Mamish. Keren Mamish is a fund that was established shortly after Gimel Tammuz. The objective of the fund is similar to the Kranes that the Rebbe himself established, and the idea is that a fund needed to be established to strengthen and continue all of the Rebbe's Pa'ulis, the Rebbe's Shlichus, Batei Chabad, and so on. Over the years, Keren Mamish has engaged in many activities, offering seed money and various Pa'ulis of Shluchim around the world. Most recently, Keren Mamish has engaged in supporting and financing mitzvah tanks to combat the negative forces in the world and do the Rebbe's work of Afatzas Hamayanis Chutza and Afatzas Hayadas Chutza. As Gimel Tammuz approaches, many feel that it is an appropriate and positive thing to donate to Keren Mamish in honor and in connection with Gimel Tammuz. You can donate to Keren Mamish through going to magbis.org, magbis.org, and looking for the tab of Keren Mamish.
I remember when Wednesday night when the Algemeiner would come to Essen Bench, there was a line till President Street. I'm not exaggerating, but hundreds of people were buying the newspaper because it was exciting news. Yeah, and the Rebbe, of course, would get it every week. And I remember Lubavitch Askonim came to my father and said, it's affecting our business. We have partners, my partners. So my father said, they're not affecting my business. So the Rebbe's covered. We would get every Motzei Shabbos, we were getting 20 pepperoni treifa pizza pies. They broke our windows. No, I'm not, this is not exaggeration, by the way. If you know that, it's hard to imagine today. Mamish terrorism, they broke windows. My father worked late because he would he worked late at night. So my mother would get calls in the middle of the night, we kidnapped your husband, or he's dead. And they knew where he was. So my mother was always, terrified. I remember my brother was learning with his chaver in our house, and a stone came flying in. It was just common. And but my father was the opposite. They didn't know who they're dealing with. He's a real sinus nefesh person, my father. He's not intimidated. So it got stronger and stronger, and he went every week. I'm trying to remember. It was just it was endless. But slowly he won. Lubavitch won. That's when the Lamed Zayin, the Talucha. I was there. So the Talucha, we went to Williamsburg, and we were warned already that they're going to that we shouldn't come, but the Rebbe said we should go. We go every year. As soon as we got into Williamsburg, Jewish Williamsburg, right away they're already surrounding us and throwing eggs and mices, and they didn't let us go to the shuls. And then they started looking. Shlomo Zachi got beat up because of my father. And I think another label grown got, they all thought it was my father. They thought my father came. He didn't come to the Taluch. But they're looking for Gershon Ber, Gershon Jacobson. The Algemeiner Journal, they call it, Algemeiner Journal. Anyway, that's when the Rebbe said basically no longer the Birurim are finished there. That was a real big one. And that was Lamed Zayin. And then Lamed Ches. And it slowly got, then what they did was probably the final straw. They firebombed the Algemeiner. The Algemeiner had an office in Bay Ridge. And they firebombed it the night of the newspaper was supposed to come out, the next day, middle of the night. They threw Molotov cocktails. I'm talking about real terrorism. The whole building was in fire. Everything, the whole building was burned down. My father came, and remember when he saw that, they did the wrong thing for him. He said, oh, no. He went to Empire Press. They redid the whole newspaper with big pictures of the fire. And he wrote the big headline. He said, not Stalin and not Hitler brought us down, and definitely not the Fasamtem Mais when the Satmar, that was his headline. Because Stalin and Hitler didn't destroy us, we're not going to let the Satmar. That was his voice. And that was like a big one, because he really... And then finally they could not withstand the pressure, because everybody was reading that Satmar was a terrorist every week with pictures. So they finally quieted down, but not entirely. They still went after Pinyakorf and Mendel Wechter. And then the story with the oil, with the dog. That was like, by the Rebbe, that was like... Yeah. What year was that? Mem Aleph?
No.
Mem Beis?
No, I think it was before.
Pinyakorf was Mem Gimel.
That was in Lamed, I think.
No, the late Lameds?
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe. Yeah.
The Pinya was like a Mem Dalet.
Mem Gimel.
That was later.
Yeah, Pasha Pinchas it was. Yeah. So there you go. Pretty colorful, right?
Indeed.
Starting to understand some of the psychology of the Yakubashvilis.
We're getting it.
Okay.
Okay, I think it's time to start the podcast with Rabbi Simon Jacobson.
How many? Okay, whatever you want. I'm not as colorful as this. What can I tell you? I'm very boring compared to
You have a very different, colorful, different experience.
Okay. You guys are enjoying?
So,
okay, let me say l'chaim.
Say l'chaim.
Hey. So we're here and the Fasamta Mais are gone. Chaim.
So you obviously grew up in a very colorful, unique Chabad mishpacha in Crown Heights. And at the same time, you're in 1070, you're with everyone else and everything like that.
Yeah.
So everything that's happening in Lubavitch is basically in the Beiner from when you're a child. But we all know that you have a unique story with yourself, with the Sichos and with chazara and with Hanachas. So that's kind of unique to you. That's not something that your father did. So I'm interested in a little bit briefly about what it was like for you to grow up as a child. You mentioned a lot about your father, but about around the Rebbe.
Yeah.
And the whole idea, the way you got into the Hanachas and everything like that, before we get into the details, was that something you knew you're doing at 12 years old, or this is something that developed at a later point? What's the story over there? I asked a long question, but... No,
I got it. I'll tell you. Okay, so I was born the oldest of 5 children. A boy, girl, boy, girl, boy. Some of you may be familiar with my youngest brother. And yes, I went 1 year. The first year I went to Holotera kindergarten, but after that I went to Lubavitch Yeshiva, Bedford and Dean, famous Bedford and Dean, till Tovshin Chavtes, 1969. There was the fire. And then we moved to Ocean Parkway. I'm just giving you a little lay of the land. I was bar mitzvah in the year of Tovshin Lamed, the year of Moshiach Sefer Torah. We all thought Moshiach was coming that Friday afternoon. And yes, I'm an old-time Crown Heightser. Born in Crown Heights. I was born on St. Mark's, lived on Sullivan Place, Montgomery Street, where my mother still lives. And that was my so-called upbringing. Now, because I lived in an interesting home, I mean, what was unique was, on one hand, it was very intense because, obviously it was all the traditional Chabad customs. Pesach was the Russian-style Pesach, where no processed food, period. Everything was made, at home. Potato starch, boiling sugar, chulu v'chulu, no milk. And especially when we went to my grandparents, Lipska's are Meshuggah Kanoim, OCD level. So, no, it's important, you'll soon see. But it was beautiful. I honestly had beautiful experiences. I was in the right place at the right time. Only really wonderful memories. My grandma, as I said, Pesach by the Lipska's was something else. Everybody had their own plates and all that. So I had a lot to laugh at as well. So I remember sitting by the Pesach Seder. I was maybe 7 years old. My uncle, my youngest uncle, Shmuel Lipska, I'm sitting near him, and it comes to the first kos. Just a taste a little of my upbringing. So there's a saber, right? You have to lean, recline. So I'm reclining, and he decides I'm not reclining enough. 7-year-old, let alone. And he starts telling me, you have to recline more. He starts pushing me. So I said, what's the share of reclining? You ever heard this? How much do you have to recline? What angle? And so I said, what? But then I got upset. So I said to him, why do you have to recline anyway? He said, Derech Cherus. He starts hanging my head and says, Derech Cherus, you have to be free. Be free. That was a classic example. And so again, I did not need therapy for this. It wasn't one of those. I found it amusing. I had a taste of what we call dogmatic Judaism, for lack of a better word.
A lot of that.
Yeah. But my parents' home, especially my father, was the exact opposite. It was never, I never got a slap from my father, even though the principal thought I did. That was one of the ways that, but my father was very laid back and very easygoing, very comfortable in his own skin. So today when I look back at it, I see there are a lot of insecure Jews, and they use Yiddishkeit as a crutch. But no, there's no, by the way, I speak openly because I don't feel that I was abused. I feel I was entertained, That's how I feel. So I look at it more I'm saying it because I had friends, to be very honest, my classmates that were abused, that they had fathers that were, mamish terrorized them. I have guys that I know from my class that today completely left Yiddishkeit, part of it because it was traumatic for them. I'm not justifying that, I'm just saying. So I became aware later. I wasn't aware then, I was a kid. But so the reason I'm mentioning it is because it helps explain a lot of my own life. Because on one hand, I was exposed to it all. But on the other hand, I had the freedom, because of my own parents, to be very skeptical. I could ask questions. In an environment like that, questions were not allowed. You asked a question, I remember, I'm not going to say which teacher in the Lubavitch yeshiva, I asked a question, I said, why do we have to learn all these hair-splitting details in the Gemara? You give mortgage contracts and credit card statements to lawyers to read for you. You don't have to read every possible scenario. I remember my teacher came over and gave me a slap. He says, "Bist a Perek El mit nur zen sodas von dir." He was half right. I'm not gonna,
So you did. There was some abuse.
what?
That's not abuse.
No, also not, because
That was normal.
no, it wasn't. Yeah, no, it was. Trust me, compared to real abuse, it was not at all. I found it troubled me for a different reason. So for me, and I'm being very open with you, it's not something common in the Chabad circles, but I'll say this. I was not inspired. I was uninspired. I was bored. That was really the biggest thing. And so I learned. I had a good head. I was able to learn a Gemara. But sometimes I learned and sometimes I didn't. There were months I didn't even know what Masechta we were learning. Being very straight. It was a lot of waste of time. And there was no real, and a lot of good Rabbeim, a lot of good teachers we had, Yerushalayim, but they didn't know how, a guy like me, I was also more of a more rebellious in a way, more troublemaker. I wasn't like a goody-goody Kabbalah Selnik. I was more creative and so on. I'm talking in retrospect. I didn't know it at the time. And it was like, Yiddishkeit was very mitzvahs hanoshim u'lamada. Let's put it that way, very cultural. We did it. Why? Why? Davening, we all know. I'm telling what I'm saying here. I don't think anyone in this room or anyone that grew up is going to disagree that they had a similar, maybe it didn't bother them. Me, it did bother because it was like mediocre. It wasn't like, I always felt that you want to do something passionate with your life. And this was when I started thinking about things like this. I'm talking about now 14, 15, 16. I was very curious.
Was your yachas with the Rebbe also like mediocre then?
The yachas with the Rebbe was like the king on the mountain. I respected the Rebbe, of course, but I didn't have a personal connection. The Rebbe's the Rebbe, went to Yechidus. I remember those years we went for Yom Haledes to Yechidus, to Lamed Daled. Chayel, the Rebbe stopped it. So I went, but what was Yechidus? I wrote the same note I wrote last year. They told me, I said, what do I write? They said, write what you wrote last year. I posted a copy of what I wrote last year, and I said to myself, it's ridiculous. I'm wasting the Rebbe's time, wasting my time. What am I going to Yechidus for? So there was a machlekes then between Bochrim. Some said, me gate saivi. Tat, me gate some tat. Others said, so take a work on yourself, prepare yourself. So it was very mechanical. So it was not negative. It was like that. So the Rebbe was there. I was part of the scene. Simchas Torah, Purim, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. I got caught up in the excitement of it. But personally, no. I didn't understand Chassidus yet at all. Rabbi El was our mashpia. I remember he asked me in a farher, Bechina, he said, "No, what's the unterschied zwischen Chachma, Bina, and Das?" So I said, Chachma hebt sich mit Aches, Bina mit Abeis, and Das mit Adalad. I remember he said to me, Du gehst ein aggressor maskel. That's what he told me. He said like a joke, but that was my Chassidus. But I'm not surprised because today I talk to people and I recognize right away where one guy said to me, I said, you know Chassidus? He says, yeah, Lamed Tes Malachas and Esses Firis. This 39 plus 10 and this, Hakarain 4 worlds. There's 4 worlds. He says, I don't know where it is exactly in outer space, but there's 4 worlds. I'm not trying to be funny. I'm just really trying to describe what it was like.
So what happened?
I was bored. We played basketball. We went to the pool room once in a while. The big trouble we made was remember, we didn't have a lot of options. Drugs had not entered yet. There was no such thing as pot. Didn't exist. Not that I was looking for it. I'm just saying, so it was very innocent. And I was not rebellious in the Maisa B'Peil sense. It's not like I needed to go out and do things out there. In Machshava, I was very rebellious. The truth is, as I look back, I was looking for a purpose in life. And I was not really feeling it. I know it sounds strange because Chabad is all about purpose and mission. But I was not getting it at a 15-year-old boy. It was like, it was not said that way. Maybe the language, maybe, I don't know. I'm not blaming anyone, by the way. That's what was my life experience.
So what happened to you?
I still don't know. I'm still wondering. That's why we're here. I thought I'm going to learn from this. That head is going to teach me. It's a dead head and an Indian, I wasn't miserable. I was just bored. You means bored. You just sit around and and again there was nothing very dramatic about it. Like I saw guys in my class that had real problems at home. And they got into trouble. Guys got in trouble with gambling and this. There were problems. But me it was like going through. But I was like a rebel without a cause. That's probably, if you want to sum it up. I wouldn't know those words then. Now I know. And I really was thinking, I was looking for, can Yiddishkeit be legitimate for me? Not because my parents and everyone around me says it is. can I live my life as an adult and embrace it because I feel it resonates with me? That was, in a way, if I were able to pose it as a question. And I asked people, and I knew you couldn't talk about it much, because as soon as you say anything like that, you're right away labeled as a heretic, So it was more quiet, it was more internal. And again, I didn't do anything that would jump out. If someone saw me, they wouldn't think that I'm going through, but I was struggling internally. And what happened was, it's a series of events. I got a little older, I was like 15, 16 now. I remember the first thing that really struck me was I used to ask all the mashpiyim and the counselors, the head counsel, the guys you knew. I said, so how do you know there's a God? I wanted to hear and everyone said the same slogans. But I remember asking one guy, I said, how do you know there's a God? And he said to me, I can tell you who it is. It was Zusha Wiener, a rabbi in Brighton Beach. He was the head counselor in camp. I think it was Lamed Gimel. And he said to me, because the world is gvul, these were the words he told me, everything is finite, and finite things can never turn into infinite. So it has to have a beginning. That was what he said. And I happen to like mathematics a lot. I like physics and math. I did a lot of reading on that. And I knew that's correct. It's a mathematical rule. The finite never reaches the infinite. And I said, how do you know? Where did you hear that? Because it intrigued me. It intrigued me personally. So he said, I'll show you. And he shows me, he opens a derech mitzusecha, a monos elikus. He shows me. And first time I ever saw something in a sefer, that I said, this is it's very, very, very intriguing. And I started reading it, and I started looking more. And this was like, life is accumulative. There's no one thing that happens. I didn't have one thing, I saw the truth. So it just triggered something, and I began to look more. And again, I was looking for emes. I wasn't looking it wasn't like a yetzer hara thing that I'm looking just to have fun. I was looking for real answers. And that began a process. The best way I put it is that I began to hear the music of Yiddishkeit through Chassidus. I realized it's the spiritual that I really need. That the mechanical, because I knew I learned Gemara, I learned halacha my whole life. That was just not, I knew the rules, and I understand their importance for rules. It wasn't bothering me, but the rules didn't excite me. Let me put it that way. It didn't excite my soul. I don't know, maybe it excites yours. And this did. I realized that the spiritual resonates with me. I started understanding, soulful things, and then I started hearing the Rebbe differently. Then I heard a sikha no longer as just a diukim and Rashi and then the answers. Brilliant, as brilliant as they were more academic. I started hearing that there was like a poetry, a music, I must say.
Were you listening to the sikhas before?
Yeah, but it was. I learned this. I read a sikha like I read a Gemara.
No, not I read.
No,
You went to farbrengens.
Yeah, it was by farbrengens. Yeah, but they didn't also the same type of lack of inspiration really. Not the Nigunim and the Rebbe himself. I'm talking about the Teicher. Teicher was very deep, but like learning deep learning. It was not emotional for me. Didn't touch my neshama.
Yeah,
does that shake you?
I'm trying to understand, and I'm trying to hear from you like this change and like.
No, so then I realized, there's a certain maturity. I started realizing the Rebbe speaks. You all learned the Bar Mitzvah Maimer. Yeah, when you said the Bar Mitzvah Maimer, you understood one word you said. Besides, okay, there you go. And then the Rebbe says that's not even the right translation, right?
And they took it out.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that's how I heard it. Again, a Rashi Sikha, I could hear the Rebbe, but the Rebbe was a Gaon, a Lamdan. They're not to resonate, that I would run, I need to hear this because it's so important for my life. No, I did not have that. And again, I look at myself, I'm not blaming anyone. And that changed. Then I started, it resonated with me. I started understanding, like Esesphiris was no longer just a number. It was like 10 building blocks of what makes us tick. I understood that pretty quickly. Then I started, the more I got involved, the more I was intrigued by it, and I was drawn to it. And then I realized this is a profound system. I always knew that Yiddishkeit is here for 4,000 years. It's not by accident. It's not like a bunch of idiots just passing it on generation to generation. Jews are smart people. But I just didn't know what the code was. It's like, you see there's something here, but I don't know what it is yet. Chassidus changed that dramatically. It didn't take long. After a few months, I started derech mitzvah. I learned a lot. And then I started understanding that it's code language, really. You say the word atzilus, just a word. You have to explain what it means in a spiritual way, in a personal way. And it became clear. Then I started understanding when the Rebbe says Teira Meloshen Hira, that's what he means. That every word, the mitzvah, who cares about a mitzvah today? But when you understand the mitzvah is a Hira b'Avedis Hashem, then there's lessons. It came alive. The Chayenu Ve'erech Yameinu of Teira came alive for me.
Beautiful.
That's really what happened. And this is the year, then when that happened, I'm also like an extremist. Once I get intrigued, I'm in. I don't need, I wasn't like lazy. I then became excited about it. That was the end of Ocean Parkway. Then we went to Morristown, and then I started getting very intrigued by the process of farbrengens, the chazara. And I went, as I said, once I'm in all the way.
That, because I guess you said you're an extremist, so now that you're in. So if I'm in, I need to be not just buy a farbrengen, I need to retain it, I need to... I could
and to be very honest, I wanted to go to the top.
Right.
I'm not mitzad gaiva, I wanted access.
You don't have any gaiva?
No, I have plenty of gaiva, but this was not what's driving me. Here was more, I wanted, if you like music, I want to be good at it.
Right.
Like that.
Okay, so
then I began to hang out by chazara, and I'd be able with chozer, and I would listen.
But while you were in Morristown?
Yeah.
You'd come every... We
were here for farbrengen, so the bus go back to Morristown after chazara.
Okay.
So I would hang out, and I started getting to know who the chozer were, the manichim. I became friendly with David Feldman, with David Oladort, Shalom Chartonov.
What year is this?
Lamed Vov, Lamed Hey. Lamed Hey is really...
So who were the characters? David Feldman, all the...
They were just beginning to reform. You had on your podcast, they were beginning to reform Anochas.
We had David Oladort and
Nantik, yeah. So who are the guys? David Feldman, David Oladort, Shalom Chartonov, Tzvi Greenblatt. And then they had a team that helped. What's his name? Wahlberg. Yeah.
He was also...
He helped in Marmikemis more, research. And I didn't get involved directly with them, but I got to know them. And by chazara, I would pipe in. Something though said, I would say, I heard this.
There was a little democracy by chazara.
Yeah. Rabbi El with chazar. But anyone could say, there's and Rabbi El would sometimes say, the Rebbe is gesagt, a paar minutes später, and it was very easy in that sense. And and then that was Lamed Hey, Lamed Vov. Then when I came back to Morristown, I was chazar for the yeshiva Sunday night. So I already started chazaring. I was intrigued also by the process of memorizing, that the Rebbe speaks and there's no recording, and you have to remember it. It was like a challenge. It's like, can you remember? I didn't know if I could or not, but then I began, and I was pretty good at it. Then you get better, I remember I chazared a farbrengen once, and Rabbi El actually walked by, and he came over to me. He said, "Sehr good, I remember." So it was like encouragement, from someone that, but really nobody really, as in Chabad, they don't give you any compliments, and nobody cultivates you. You got to cultivate yourself. So you need to have a lot of self-confidence, because if not, everybody's mevatel you right away. Who do you think you are?
Who you?
Yeah, who you? Yeah. Or go away, stay, go, like that. Then that was Morristown. Then in Lamed Vov, I came to 770, and I was not what do they call it? A bench presser. What do they say? It's a kvetch in a bank. I wasn't like that type of masmid. And then the Rebbe sent a gift. Nittel night, Tovshan Lamed Zayin, Sefer Lekutim, the Rebbe called him Rabbi Mentlik, and I was there in the Zal.
What's going on? Sefer Lekutim, what is it?
I thought I'm talking to insiders here. Okay. I'm just kidding. It's all right. I'll tell you. So I came Lamed Vov after Lag Baimer. they sent all the bach in my class to different shlichus. Seattle began then, Miami was already yeshiva, Melbourne was yeshiva, in New Haven, Cincinnati, a few other places, I don't remember. So, I don't know, maybe this is confession time. Chatos Ani Masket here again. I went to Shmulik Heber, who me and him would always have Rebbenishin, and he said to me...
He was the Maristan.
He was the Maristan, the Rosh Shiva. Melech Tzvivel was the Mashpia. And once I was intrigued, I learned a lot from Melech in these, because I was absorbing. And I was like it was the good year. Lamed Vov. But I learned Nigla too, but Nigla al Chassidus, you know. I remember, so Shmulik Heber told me, I'm going to send away to the worst possible shlichus. So I remember the last farbrengens, we're all dancing, we're half all shikr. So I went over to Shmulik, I said, if you want to really do me a favor, I know you don't want to, don't send me anywhere. I belong in 770, I got to be there. So he said, if you want to be there, then I'm not going to let you to be there. But I anyway ended up not going anywhere, thank God.
It's amazing the relationship that you had with your yeshiva.
No, we're actually very good friends nowadays. Anyway, I ended up 770, learning. And then the Rebbe, Nittel was Friday night. That's not a usual kviyas. It's like a little uncommon. And the Rebbe, the classic way the Rebbe transforms everything. So Nittel, what do Bachim do Nittel night? There's no chess, it's Shabbos, right? And there's no anything else. So it was an official bull session, Chassidus bull session in long Shabbosim that start 5 o'clock. So from 5 till 9 o'clock, you're sitting for 4 hours officially, shooting the breeze, whatever. People would actually have topics they came to talk about. All the Lashon Haras and the politics. That was the Nittel Friday night. So we're sitting right after Ma'ariv, and Mentler goes into the Rebbe's room, and we don't know why. And suddenly Mentler comes out, Asifa, Nittel night, he's making an Asifa. There's a Zal upstairs in 770, all the bar was packed, all the Bachim were there, the Rebbe has a Eirah, 2 Eirahs. We were all so intrigued, like what's going on here? And it's interesting, Nittel Nacht, you're not supposed to learn, but the Rebbe came out of a Hirah about learning, interesting. And the Hirah was that the Rebbe wants to establish 2 things. Sefer Lekutim Dach Tzemach Tzedek and Mafteches and Ayin Beis. Because Yutas Kislev that year, Lamed Zayin, a month before Nittel, the Rebbe came out with Ayin Beis.
The Rebbe said he'll print it.
Yeah, it was a big Chiddush. And he wanted the Koil Yungalite to make a Maftech and Ayin Beis. Until Yud Shvat, they should finish. And Bochrim, whoever wants to volunteer, encyclopedia of the Chassidus of the Tzemach Tzedek.
Sefer Lekutim.
Called Sefer Lekutim. The Rebbe gave the name, everything. And the Bochrim that do it, it's like Shmiras Hasdarim. That was the real... to me, it was like a gift, Mamish Min HaShamayim. I thought it was Mamish for me. Because I was like sitting and learning alone, but research and preparing and it was like up my alley. And then Mitzvah Shabbos, we all started, like 150 Bochim, and by Sunday morning, it ended up 6 guys, as usual. And I was a part of that Mareches for a good few years. Then, while I was also involved in the writing the farbrengens and the chazaras. So this is my beginning of my career.
So you were telling,
so to speak, unpaid for the record. Yeah, it's almost still unpaid, but
it's coming soon.
Yeah.
So
maybe once people hear this podcast,
sure, yeah,
we'll make a charity campaign.
100%.
I'm just kidding.
For their hair, we'll make them.
We'll split the proceeds.
Split the proceeds. So Sefer Lekutim.
Yeah.
I was discussing with you last week about some of the process. What did it mean? What was the undertaking?
Well, nobody knew about the Tzemach Tzedek's Chassidus B'chlal. We knew there was Eira Teira, but that was like overwhelming. Like 40, 50 volumes. Derech Mitzvah everyone knows. But that was it. So we had no clue what it was. But it was clearly the Rebbe wanted it. In the beginning, we mamish had no idea. I remember even talking to Rabbi Yael and to Melech Tzvibel, and I said, what does the Rebbe want? They said, I don't know, nobody ever really learned Eira. I mean, these guys learned Eira Teira privately, but it was not like, even today, how many people know what Eira Teira is? Because so many, but now in retrospect, I see the value. Eira Teira basically has Kol Chassidus in it, Tzemach Tzedek is like Das, brings everything from the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe. And so essentially it's creating erchim, which are entries. Let's say you want to know about snow. What does Torah and Chassidus say about Sheleg? You go to Erech Sheleg, you'll have everything you need. Now remember, this is before Google and before AI, so it's all a physical encyclopedia. Today, we understand that probably, this is a speculation, the Rebbe wanted Sefer Erchim from Rabbi Yael, but Rabbi Yael was working at snail pace of one volume every 10 years. I'm not exaggerating. So I think the Rebbe was another way of getting an encyclopedia, and that's why the Rebbe said we should start from Tov and work our way backwards. We thought maybe he could meet Rabbi Yael halfway. Well, we didn't actually do that, but so it was 6 years, a project that Bochum did.
So you're working with only the printed Svarim or for Kisvei Yad?
No, we started with printed Svarim, which were many, at least 40 printed Svarim. And so the first Erech I did was Tchias HaMesim. So you find everywhere in Eretz Torah talks about Tchias HaMesim. We would make photocopies of it, then organize it like in structure. What is Tchias HaMesim? When will it happen? And then you had like what's called a full entry. The same thing I did Teferes. There was Torah. Torah was a big Erech. This was taking all the printed books, and the Rebbe said at the end of every entry, all the indexes from all the Rebbeim on the same topic. So if you go to Tchias HaMesim, at the end of it, you'll have everything from the Alter Rebbe to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak on Tchias HaMesim, all in one place. So at the time, we didn't understand the value. Today, a lot of people use it. It's excellent for research. I'm telling you anything, you could find it there. And the Tzemach Tzedek takes all the Gemaras and all the Chazal. So it takes you everywhere. Kol HaTorah Kula, Pshat, Remez, Drusad, and of course Chassidus. And every Friday we had to give in a list to the Rebbe what we had ready. We'd give in, and the Rebbe would comment. And it was a mamish gift from above, because it gave me a real project. It was research. It was everything I was good at. I knew I could be. I wasn't good at it yet, but I learned on the job. It's like a research project, essentially. I told usually before I spoke a few months ago to the Anhola of Holtera and Lubavitch Yeshiva, I said you have to create projects like this for Bochum who can't. Not everybody's ready to sit and learn 6 hours. They need research learning. What's wrong with it's learning
Projects.
Yeah, and we did it. It was fascinating, and the Rebbe would interact. Then I remember the first time the Rebbe Tzeichen Sefer Likutim in Asicha. It was like a big simcha. Then later, when the manuscripts started coming from the handwriting of the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe told us to compare.
You mean from Poland?
From Poland,
yeah.
So then the Rebbe told us to compare it, and it was a big job.
So what happened when you compared?
So I think I shared some stories with you, right?
Yeah, but no one else was here.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I'll have to give a little history. In Tavshin Lamed Ches, the Frierdiker Rebbe, when he left Russia, so we know he left some libraries in Russia. That's where the Schneerson library that the Rebbe wants to come out. But he took some things with him. We know this whole story with the Sfarim he took with him. But by the Nazis confiscated some of it, so the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't bring everything. So in 1978, they found boxes of Tzemach Tzedek, Reb Marash, the Mittler Rebbe's handwriting. So it was a big simcha by the Rebbe. He sent Rabbi Aaron Chitrek, all of our Shalom, and Rabbi Ramel Shem Tov.
There's a nice article in the on the side.
Okay. So they brought the books. So being that we were working on the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe said we should compare everything to the original manuscripts, because the Rebbe, when he published it, didn't have the original Ksav Yad. He had a hataka. Hataka means a copy, and the copies usually had mistakes. So there's a lot of interesting stories how the Rebbe would sometimes, when he had a bad copy, he would write in a footnote that there's missing a word here, and the Rebbe would fill it in. Then when we looked at the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe was machavan in most cases, but there were a few places where the Rebbe wrote something that was different than what the Tzemach Tzedek wrote. So
what happened?
So we asked the Rebbe what to do. I'll give you an example. I think it's in the Erech Moshe. It talks there about the Gevia Kesef of Yosef. So he says something like, I think, that the Gevia is Gematria, I don't remember what, Bris maybe. And Moshe Kosa B'Glukute Teira, Seif Parsha, blank. In the Rebbe's Ksaviyah that he had, it's just a blank line.
Kute Teira.
From the Arizal, Kute Teira from the Arizal. Now I'm looking at the Tzemach Tzedek's actual handwriting, and he writes, Kute Teira Seif Parsha Miketz. And I look it up, and it says there, the Rebbe, when he had a blank, he wrote a footnote that he looked in Likutei Torah, did not find it in Likutei Torah, but look in Taimei HaMitzvos from that is all the same idea. So what do you do now? Tzemach Tzedek is telling us where it is. The Rebbe writes, he didn't find it. So most people would say, the Rebbe's Ha'ara is not valid anymore. Now you have the Tzemach Tzedek, who wrote the Maimer in the first place. Everybody following? Okay, so I wrote to the Rebbe, and I asked, what do we do? And the amazing answer, the Rebbe said, leave my Ha'ara as it is. And in the footnote, under the Ha'ara, write, the Achazman. After a while, the original manuscript of the Tzemach Tzedek came, and that's what it says there. So in other words, the Rebbe's words are just as holy, and the Rebbe left that and the Tzemach Tzedek. There's a lot of examples like this that we had, interactions. Now you have to remember, for a bacher like myself, this was exciting because you were like interacting with the Rebbe and learning and research. And I remember waiting for an answer on this. I couldn't even, couldn't breathe. I wanted to hear what the Rebbe was going to answer.
Who wrote all these things in?
Well, Sefer L'Kudim, I wrote a lot of them, or other people in the Mareches. We had a few guys. The original editors were myself, Menashe Perman, who's now in Chile, Shliach, Meir Schneer, he's in Montreal, Itchik Rifkin, a guy called Shlomo Chaim Feldman, he's Israeli, Armeir Magolin, and what was his name? Matasov. He's a shliach in the oldest, one of the older brothers, older than Ella.
Madison? No,
much older. He's married to a Pinson. Anyway, these guys. Now they were older Bachrim. I was the youngest. By Tov Shalom et Ches Lametes, they were all married. So I'm suddenly left alone in this whole Mareches. So I created a new staff, Meir Asi, Alta Tenenbaum, a whole bunch of, there's guys that were here that told me they were. Yitzchok Raskin was part of it. So it ended, the project finished Mem Gimel. So it was one of the few projects that began and ended.
It actually ended.
And the Rebbe was very happy. 6 years. It was a project of 6 years. So I only worked there for 3 years, because in Lametes I started really getting involved in the Sichos.
Okay, so now tell us about the Sichos.
Okay. So now comes the Sichos. I started helping, I started becoming more involved, and I started looking over the Hanochos, adding, I wrote a few of them. But the main writers, David Feldman was the main writer in the Yiddish Hanochos. There was no Lahak. Nothing was Hebrew. David Oldot and Shalom Charatonov took over after Tzvi Greenblatt went to Argentina, my morim. And that was the work. In Tov Shalom Etes, David Feldman decided to go on Shlichus to Eilat, Israel. So I was the natural guy to take over. He asked me to become the writer. So I became the official writer. And basically Shabbos Chanukah Tov Shemem. It's my first Hanocha Shabbos that I wrote from beginning to end. And that I did till Tov Shenun Beis, till the Rebbe's stroke, the week of Pasha Vayakel. So I did this for 13 years as the official writer. Chozer, I was already from Lamed Zayin, Lamed Ches. So basically 15, 16 years that I was fully immersed in this work. Okay. When the Rebbe had the heart attack, for example, in Tov Shalom Lamed Ches, so he was Magia, the Sichos, Motzei Simchas Torah, Motzei Shabbos Bereishis. That's when I really started working with Rabbi El very heavily. Rabbi El was writing the Sichos, and I would work with him. So I learned a lot on the job.
See, typically he wasn't writing Hanoch.
No, but that was a special because the Rebbe wanted
to.
Yeah. I always tell the story just as a funny anecdote. Rabbi El was a character, tremendous. I mean, I have tremendous hakaras hatev because I learned a lot from him because he was, the things that he had, his strengths were unbelievable. He had also Mishagasan, like everybody. And but we were very close. And I remember he would, one night, it was like 4 o'clock in the morning, like now, what time is it? He was working, and I was like, bringing my sefer, I was looking up things, whatever. And he says to me, Simon, willst du eine Teva for Klal Yisrael? Like in the middle of 4 a.m., someone's asking you, do I want to do a favor for Klal Yisrael? So I thought, what does he want, cigarettes or coffee? I don't know, what's the Teva for Klal Yisrael? He wasn't sending me to as Yisrael with Anashlichus or something. So I said, what's the Teva? He says, Lerne is ganz lekut Teira Baal Peh. So he tells me, I should learn the whole lekut Teira Baal Peh. So I told him, right now? He says, kannst du eben jetzt? So I said, why? Why is that a Teva? He says, everything is lekut Teira. If you knew it Baal Peh, we didn't have to sit and look and search and ISIS and Zach, and everything would be half of the work would be done already. So I said, I'll get back to you and I'll let you know. Anyway, that was funny. And then he told me a story, actually. He said when he was a Bacher, Tovshin Yud Aleph, the Rebbe asked all the Bacher in Yeshiva in 770 to take a sefer in Chassidus and learn it from beginning to end for that year. Learn it solid. So he took Lekut Teira. And the Rebbe told him, Lekut Teira, Yeder Shura is a maimer. That's not, you should do Derech Mitzvah. So he did Derech Mitzvah. He knew Derech Mitzvah like nobody. Every letter. You tell him a letter, he could tell you what page it was on exactly. He was like Derech Mitzvah, because, the innocent Bacher, he learned, but that's when I remember that was like, so this was the experience. Like every day I was surrounded by such experiences. It was very rich, what should I say? You learn a lot from, Abiel was there from the beginning, so it was a tremendous experience. And then when the Rebbe was Magia, you learn from the Hagos.
So one second.
Okay.
So,
go ahead.
So I want to ask you about some of the process and Hagos and the Rebbe's interaction with it. But before, can you explain to me the Rebbe's farbrengens general? What is the uniqueness of it? What is the contribution that the Rebbe brought with farbrengens that didn't exist before by all the other Rebbeim? The farbrengens, what's going on here?
You want me to say this to a Chabad audience or to a larger audience?
I'm Chabad.
I don't know what you are, because we didn't interview you. The mystery of the Mr. Deher. Okay, I'll answer in the broadest way I can. Remember, I know Chassidus through the Rebbe's lens. So even though we learn about Alter Rebbe, Tanya, Teireh, Lekut Teira, of course, Mitler Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek especially, I'm very familiar with because I worked in it. So when you ask a question like that, for me, the challenge is, can you really talk about the Chiddush of the Rebbe without talking about the Chiddush of Chassidus in general? Because the Rebbe didn't come out of nowhere. The Rebbe took Chassidus, Chabad, and he added to it and added them in. So that's why, to really a full good answer.
Can I narrow my question?
Huh?
Can I narrow the question?
Yeah, of course.
What's the uniqueness of the farbrengen? What is this?
Okay.
What is this experience? What's going on?
Okay,
here?
so you don't mean the Teira per se, you mean the farbrengen.
That includes the Teira also.
Okay. Well, it's a great question, to be honest, and I think many people have different answers, and they're probably all right, because it's like asking someone to listen to a niggin, what's the experience of a niggin? You'll have one experience, I'll have another experience. For me, a farbrengen was like a living Teira coming alive in so many multi-dimensions. The expression multi-sensory, it gets all your senses going, your sight, your sound, taste, touch, and smell, because it had everything. There's one hand, there's the meichin, the ideas that the Rebbe shares in a maimer or sicha. So then there's the emotional feelings, whether it's the nigunim, or even the ideas that Rebbe is sharing that are very personal, or that stimulate the emotions. And then there was the whole vibe. You felt l'mayla ma'asar tfachim. Farbrengen by the Rebbe was, you felt like you were traveling to another time and place. If you really were involved, you're immersed, like going to a different world. To me, that was like you traveled to a different world, especially the years once I really was in chazara. To me, I was not even there. I was just like in the just listening and absorbing. I wasn't processing. I wasn't thinking, this is a nice scene. Here's how I'm going to describe it. I was like in the scene, if you know what I mean. It's like, you ever you're listening to a niggin and the niggin completely consumes you. You don't even know where you are, That's how, for me, it was like just transported you to another time and place. And like the Rebbe captured the whole nitzchis of Teda, of Elikus, of Emes. In my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, I write in the epilogue that I wanted to name this book Reality. Reality. Because for me, the Rebbe captured Emes. This is what's real. We live in a world that the table is real, the food you eat. These are all superficial things. Chassidus calls it the outer garment, outer levush. Farbrengens, you had an experience of the inner forces. I remember thinking many times, I remember Shavuos Tov Lamed Hey, the Rebbe was speaking about Kama Yesa Ika B'Shuka. And I'm speaking now exactly as I remember the Farbrengens, and I was then 18 years old. And it's about the Chidush of Matan Torah. So it wasn't Schola, it wasn't Nigla, it was, you feel like experience, like you're experiencing Matan Torah. And here's exactly a hergish I had. I felt like the Rebbe was seeing something we don't see and describing it to us. Like, imagine someone looking behind the curtain and you're sitting on this side of the curtain and he's telling you what he sees. And I remember the Rebbe describing how the Matan Torah was the bitl hagzera between Elyenim and Tachtenim, where you can take now a chefza, a material object, and turn it into Kedusha. So you're take a piece of wood, and you turn it into energy. That's like a big thing. You take something, you're transforming it. And I remember the way the Rebbe was speaking about it, you could feel it happening, for me. Now, you could say this is all fantasy and so on, but I didn't feel it that way. I felt like it was that was the me of Farbrengens. It was an experience, an otherworldly experience, and then you had to re-enter into a dark, corrupt world. That's another challenge. And as I said, on many levels. I remember times when Yutzes Kislev, when the Rebbe would come in, they sang Poder Shalom Nafshi, or other certain nigunim, and you just felt, you ever see the videos when the Rebbe walks out Lag B'Omer parade, they sing Ani Mamin. It gives you like a shiver, like your spine, you feel like it's a different, the Rebbe walking with that regal Malchus Dika look, and Ani Mamin, and times by Farbrengens when the Rebbe was very emotional about Golas or Sodas, it was life. There's no real, I don't have, I don't want to limit it to an intellectual experience. It was a full human experience. And in many ways, it was like love, in a way. I mean, in a Kedushidik way, like you feel love of God. You feel the love of people. You just feel an emes. And then the sad part is when you come back to your reality and it's so different. I'm just giving you a little taste of experience. Okay. So now I just have to add that when I do my work, I write or teach, I try to capture that feeling and convey it. Yeah, I'm not saying you always do it, you can always do it successfully, but I think that's our shlichus. Because if you can give people the thing that transformed you, then that's like the ultimate. To me, that's like the repaying the debt that what you received, you're able to share. And I really believe that when people teach Torah Chassidus, especially the Rebbe's in Yonim, it's not just teaching facts. You're teaching life. And you want people to feel, it's almost like anyone that's a parent, it's not you're just teaching your children do this, do that. You're teaching them how to live life, how to be a mensch,
So when you started writing the Hanachas, so I understand you were helping, but then eventually you started basically transcribing the entire Farbrengens yourself every single Shabbos. Yeah. So what happened over there?
Okay, so I already shared how I started getting involved, chazara, hang out, then started looking over the sichos. At the end of Lamites, early Mem, David Feldman moves to Israel. So my official first Hanocha I wrote was Shabbos Chanukah, Shabbos Parsha Miketz, Tovshin Mem. The end of basically 1979. Obviously, I remember it very well because I worked very hard at it. And the Rebbe gave me a good Kabbalah's panim. He probably at least 5-6 pages of Kisvei Yad that I have just from that farbrengen, questions. The Rebbe made a hadron then on Shas, made a hadron on Tanya, a hadron on Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe. For some reason I felt that Rebbe really liked later on, which made it very hard for me, because it was very hard at farbrengen to write. But that was the first one that I wrote. And I remember the first night after chazara, I came home. I had a typewriter. There was only typewriters then. I started typing. And I tell you, the first page, it didn't work. I took the page, I crumpled it up, threw it in the garbage can. Probably 30 pages like that. And it was already 4 o'clock in the morning. And I said, maybe I took upon myself a job. I can't do it. This is ridiculous. I couldn't get by 1 page, And my father woke up early. He comes out. He says, "What's bothering you?" I said, "I'm supposed to write this farbrengen. It's a farbrengen of 4 hours. I can't even get one page done." And I was like, I was frantic almost, because it's like because I took this my achrayis. And I said, maybe I just took, I thought I was overconfident. So my father told me he was a writer. So he said, you keep doing it, maybe it'll be another 30 drafts. And ultimately, you'll get it done. And years from now, it's still going to be difficult. The only difference is you could do it, which was mamish the best advice he gave. So by 6 o'clock in the morning, I got 1 page out. And I ended up doing it, obviously. So that was my first farbrengen, Shabbos Pasha Miketz Tov Shin Mem. There was no farbrengen Vayigash. There was a farbrengen Vayechi. And that's how it started going.
So what was the process? How did it work in a typical Shabbos?
So that's the Seder. Now, remember, we had to write a farbrengen before the next farbrengen. And then had to go out and mail and so on. The process was like this. The Rebbe spoke, as you know, Sicha by Sicha. There's a whole process of chazara, which I didn't even get into, how you remember. I'm not going to go into that right now. But you right away start chazering immediately in your mind. Right after the Rebbe finishes the Sicha, you have to review the whole thing.
In between Sichas?
Yeah, when they're singing.
So by the Nigunim, you're busy thinking the Sicha?
Yeah. And you make like a mental map of the whole Sicha. And then there's a process of how you remember. And you remember a very important rule. Memory, you don't remember what was said, you remember what you remember that was said. You understand? So you have to constantly make a copy of a copy of a copy in your mind. So by the time Shabbos ends, it depends how many times you reviewed it, that's how well you remember it. Because as every minute passes, it starts fading. But the more you review it, the more you remember.
So you do it in between the Sichas?
In the Sichas, then I would do it right after the farbrengen as I was walking home. And then maybe 4 times before the Shabbos was over.
Moshe Shabbos is the chazara.
And before Moshe Shabbos, even at the table, when we sat at the table.
In the later years.
No, even by like the Suda Shabbos after.
The memes, the farbrengens could go like till the end of Shabbos.
Oh, those you didn't have time, yeah. But those that you had time, yeah.
You did it by the
yeah. Then by Motzei Shabbos, like an hour after Shabbos, we'd come together by chazara, which was downstairs in 770. In the center, there's pictures of it. Rabbi Yael would usually be the one that chazers. Sometimes he'd ask me to chazer. And then everybody would pipe in. Would take around an hour and a half, 2 hours. There was always someone writing notes. And we slowly reconstructed everything. And then we had at least a document, so there was something to work with. Then I would sometimes remind myself something in the middle of the night. Oh, we forgot this piece. Or someone would call me and say, yeah, I remember this. And then Sunday, I spent most of Sunday researching, like learning the Maimon and Tereir or L'Kutei Teireh.
You didn't do it before? No,
because I didn't know what the Rebbe would say. No, I did in general terms, but now I knew what the Rebbe said. So researching more on what the Rebbe said. I would research usually till Sunday evening. And by Sunday night, I started writing the first draft. Because by then I had...
Did you write notes by chazara?
Yes, sometimes I wrote or someone else wrote. I had the notes. But you had to, Chassidus talks about yesh, ayin, yesh. You had to forget everything before you start remembering. So I remembered then everything became one big confused mess. I don't know if you ever wrote anything. There's always confusion before you get clarity. And everything got confused. Then you slowly start picking it up. You start saying, this is the inyan. So whatever you heard by the farbrengen was just an initial understanding. Now, after research, you really start getting to see the real chiddush of the Rebbe. And that's when I would start writing. So by Monday, it took around 2-3 days. Let's say by Monday morning, I slept very little because sleep is not good for memory. And by Monday morning, I usually had the first sikha, and I would give it out to a few people. I'd give it to Rabbi Yael, who at times would review it, sometimes he wouldn't. And then I would give it to Shalom Chartonov, Oladot, if he was available, Label Altain, different people, typed draft, and they would give me back their notes. And meanwhile, I'd continue writing the next sikha and the next sikha. Simultaneously, the Maimorim writers, then it was Shalom Chartonov and David Oladot, would write the Maimer. And by Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, depending on the size of the farbrengen, I usually had the full farbrengen ready, first draft. But then I would take everyone's comments. Sometimes the comments were very aggressive. Some people said you wrote it the wrong way. I don't agree with how you wrote it. Sometimes people did agree. I remember with Rabbi Yael, I had such arguments. He said he thought it was a different approach, because you were not creating yesh ma'ayin. Remember, we didn't have a tape to refer to. It was all from memory.
So it's possible that some hanachas, there's some subjectivity based on the maniach.
Well, so let's define what subjectivity means.
You're relying on humans that could be making an error.
No, it wasn't negias, like a negeba of it, subjectivity in the sense, like, that's why I wanted others to comment.
Right.
For example, sometimes people comment and I said, yeah, you're right. They pointed out that, sometimes I wrote something and when I read it myself back, something's wrong, I'm missing, because it wasn't, but a lot of things would become clearer as you wrote. Because then you suddenly realize that what did the Rebbe actually say here? Once you write it out, once you saw, for example, a Torah Eir, and you see, the Rebbe was using this Torah Eir, and then you realize, what did the Rebbe add to it? It's hard to explain without showing you real examples. But it's a real process, a real serious process of a combination of memory, research, and understanding on inyan and Chassidus.
And an average farbrengen is 30 pages, 40 pages?
Much more.
50 pages?
No. An average, the Rebbe's pace of speaking, every hour of speaking, yielded 20 pages, double-spaced, 8.5 by 11 pages. So 5 hours of speaking is 100 pages. An average farbrengen was 3-4 hours. So you're talking about at least 60 pages. And we did pretty good. We almost got almost 100%. Like, in other words, we didn't, the memory was, so it's a combination of all the things. I'll give you an example. Here, that first farbrengen, Miketz, Tov Shemem, the Rebbe spoke with Roni v'Simchi Bas Tzion. So Chassidus asked, what's Roni and what's Simchi? Okay, so the Rebbe spoke about it, and we remembered. Then I look in Torah Eir, what the Rebbe said. It says in Torah Eir. But in Torah Eir, there's more details. And then you realize the Rebbe added a detail that didn't say in Torah Eir. But you don't know that until you look in Torah Eir. So you have to combine what states and what you remember. Understand? And then you look in Eir HaTorah, and there's another diuk. It's quite a complex process. And then you get something that's solid. Now, sometimes the Rebbe says something that doesn't say anywhere. So you have to just reconstruct it correctly. Then there were times that you heard the Rebbe that we had a question. And then I would write right away to the Rebbe that this is how we understood what you said. But the Rebbe said, Lei tafasnu, and the Rebbe would clarify. Okay, so I want to... So bottom line is by Wednesday, we had everything pretty much in place.
So I have a question for you. What was easier for you to write? The sichos before till the Maimer, or the second part for the Rashi sichos and the Pirkei Avos and everything else?
It's a good question. There's no rule, depending how complex those sichos were. Sometimes a sikha, like Miketz, going back, the first sikha was so difficult because the Rebbe spoke about a very hafshatadik inyan, koyach and poil. So the inyan was very complicated. On the other hand, the Rashi sichos were easier because it was structured. You had a Rashi, you knew the Rashi, we knew he asked 4 questions. So it was more structured, easier to write. But it all came down to how complicated the topic was, how well understood it was. If it was well understood, there are times I didn't understand the Sikha well till I finished writing. Then I realized, that's what he meant. There's things like that.
How could you write it if you don't understand?
Because you write what you heard, and you try to make a structure.
So it's like a tape recorder?
Yes, shtickle like that.
So it's a memory, it's not understanding.
Memory, right? And then you start seeing.
So you have to have a good memory to be.
Memory was more important than understanding first, for sure. And then comes the understanding part. And then comes questions. That was a very exciting part because once you had questions, you could ask the Rebbe, but you could only do that after you really heard about it. You can't just ask the Rebbe, a makivdika question.
So tell me about what was the interaction and the questions that the chazim would ask. Like, give an example or two.
I'll give it. I was actually going to give this example that I started. Maybe this is a good time. But I'll give another one first, an easier one. I'll give you an example. In Samach Vov, it talks about Terotzen and Tainug, which is higher. And the Rebbe, it's a topic the Rebbe spoke about. So I remember one Sikha, the Rebbe writes that, independent of what it says in Samach Vov, Einig is always the highest level. Because we see even the case where, let's say, Tainus Cholam, that's the example given. On Shabbos, Einig is eating a meal, Tainug Achil V'Shtiyah. But let's say a person had a bad dream. So for him, Tainus is Einig. Because the Tainus will get rid of his bad Cholam. So is this a raya that Rotzen is higher or that Tainug is higher? So in Samach Vov it says it's a raya that Rotzen is higher. Because the Rotzen not to eat is stronger than the Tainug to eat. But the Rebbe said in the farbrengens, it's a raya that Einig is higher. So we asked the Rebbe, how does it stem with Samach Vov, what it says? Because the Rebbe quoted the Samach Vov, but it seems to have a different conclusion. So the Rebbe's answer was, if you look closely, the halacha says, if Einig is lower, why does he have to say Einig? Even if it's not Einig, you want to fast. The fact that the Rotzen turned it into Einig means Einig is really ultimately what you want. The only difference is that here Rotzen created the Einig, but you still need Einig. So this person has Einig from not eating. That's an example, a very quick example. We have hundreds like this. Probably hundreds of such questions. Sometimes they are more complicated. I'll give you another example about Bnei Neach. With Shabbos Pasha B'Shalach, Tovshim Mem Gimel. The Rebbe said in the farbrengens, Moshiach is about to come, and Mishen Durigang Alexeris, Melchem is Geg and Mogeg, and now it's going to be only Menucha and Shalom, no more wars and no more death. Geg gleich Mashiach. That's what the Rebbe said, middle of a sikh. So I wrote to the Rebbe on Sunday morning, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, on the pasuk Charker B'nei Sheis, it says that either 2/3, B'nei Sheis is third, 2/3, either 2/3 of the world or 2/3 of 2/3 of the world is going to be destroyed before Moshiach comes. So I just stem with what the Rebbe said. We always wrote it respectfully and so on. And the Rebbe wrote back to me, Bli neder, yiduber bezeh, bisvadush kedesh haba aleinu l'teva. So I knew that Rebbe has a lot to say on this, because he didn't just write an answer, he said he's going to speak. So then, Shalach Yisrei was no farbrengen. Mishpatim Mem Gimel, the Rebbe starts second Sikha, mit gefrekt. I knew he was referring to this question. And a whole Sikha just on this topic. So that's another example, and the Rebbe's basic nekuda was, it's already printed today in Chelik Chav Gimel, Bolok. You look, it's not a Bolok Sikha, it's Mishpalach and Mishpatim. What is it? Because this whole Sikha grew out of a question. And there are many Sikhas that purely came from our questions. And many times the Rebbe said that we should ask, so in order that he should answer. So the Rebbe's answer was, bottom line is that, he said, the kashas of the Gemara nishtaf mir. Because the Eber says, Rachem al kol maisov. How could he destroy 2/3 of his own creation? So the Rebbe's answer at the end was that he's not going to destroy them. It'll be shini hatsura. So it's like a bittul hatsura. So that's called, it doesn't say misa, it says keloyin. Keloyin is like bittul. I mean, it's a whole sikh on this topic. That's some examples. There are many.
What was the story that you were
So this one was already, I was going to give a little more controversial one. So, briefly, Chesh Shvat, Shabbos Pasha Boy Memvov, the Rebbe says, connection of Chesh Shvat is Mesug Zeskenim Shebedeir. Time of Yeshua, all the Zeskenim passed away in Chesh Shvat. Connection to Yud Shvat is Talkus of the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe. Chesh Shvat is Talkus of the Zeskenim. The Rebbe said, but Zeskenim Loshen Rabbim. The Rebbe, Zeskenim is a bunch of Zeskenim. So the Rebbe said something that he never said. He said, the truth is, a generation can have many Rabbeim, but it's too much oir. It's like Eir HaShemesh. If it's too, it'll blind us. So that's why you only have one Rebbe. So really, many Zeskenim, because it's a bigger Gili. We always know Fakert, the Daber Echad Ladeir. So don't know Rein Rebbe, Ein Kein Godel, Ein Teire, you know. So I wrote to the Rebbe this, and I quoted the Rebbe himself, said, Yud Beis Tammuz Tov Shachov Hei, when he asked the Frierdiker Rebbe, but the Tzemach Tzedek had gepravet Rabbeistva in the time of the Mittler Rebbe. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said to the Rebbe said his name, his second name. He said, there's Shver mir gesagt. The Rebbe said his name. Was redest du? A Rebbe is not einer. So I quoted all that. And that was that. And I wanted to see what the Rebbe, the Rebbe said. Here he's speaking, Daber Echel Ladeir is B'tzad Achson. Usually it's B'tzad the Meila. You have one Rebbe, you don't have two Rebbes. Then I decided, I'm going to go on the limb, I'll take a risk. I'll write something that I know I can get a good flick, a real chelik. And I wrote, maybe with what the Rebbe is saying, you could be masber, what will happen after all the Rabbeim come back? Moshiach. So you'll have the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, all the Rabbeim. Who's going to be the Rebbe? So based on what the Rebbe is saying, it could be many Rabbeim. Because the Giluim will be so big. You understand? So it's not something... and I knew that this can be the Rebbe may not like what I'm writing. And...
it was a question.
Yeah. And maybe... So the Rebbe responds, he didn't answer the rest of the questions. He just circled this, and he wrote to me, Be'eze snif temchet mimim, befalpulim, bedvorim dakim in adakim, kemoize. You understand? In which snif, in which branch of temchet mimim are they learning and being befalpul, trying to figure out these very sensitive matters like this? In other words, who is mechanech you, basically? What do you ask me such questions? So I don't have any regrets asking. Getting a chelik like that from the Rebbe is, Sidney used to say,
there were other chalakim,
that a glet is chesed, and a patch is chesed sheba chesed. So I felt chesed sheba chesed.
There were other chalakim that the Manichim got about the Lashem.
Yeah, we got plenty of chalakim.
About the Lashon sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes the Lashon Mavil, there's a lot of bad critique. I have a lot of stories like that. But thank God the people got a lot worse than me.
So how did you take those things?
I always took it professionally, that the Rebbe is the ultimate surgeon, and he's teaching you precision. And, because, at least for me, many of the mistakes were not stupid mistakes. They were like dakas, things that were subtle. The Rebbe caught it. I remember the Rebbe once wrote to me, Mavil, that I missed a whole Maimar Chazal. You know what it was? There's a story of Nachum Chernobler. If you have two things to do, how do you know which is the right thing to do? So one way is by knowing where you have most resistance. The thing you don't want to do is the thing you need to do. So we wrote it. We wrote the story. The Rebbe writes, Mavil, that we missed the Maimar Chazal Mefurish. Now you tell me which Maimar Chazal. So the Rebbe, Maimar Chazal, there's a din that says, Eya v'seina seina kedem. If you have, a person that is carrying a heavy weight, and he's your oyev, and there's a seina, you have to help your seina first. So by the Rebbe, that's a raya to the story, the thing you don't want to do. Stand by the Rebbe, that was a mavit. Okay, but when you're on the Rebbe's level, so, no, I did not feel bad. I saw it as a learning experience. From the Rebbe, I learned how to write much more precise. I learned dakas, dika things. For me, it was training. It's like imagine a master musician, and he's showing you that you're playing the piano not so perfect. That to me was a bracha. I mean, I'm just lahavdil, I'm just giving you an example. You learn from the best. I saw the Rebbe as the best, by all means. I embraced the Rebbe's critique very positive. There were guys that had thin skin, and I remember there were guys that had big egos, and they they were competing with the Rebbe, but they got insulted. I never got insulted. I saw it always as, pour it on, from my point of view.
Okay, so there's many shaylos and manichim and answers. I'm not going to cover all of them. In fact, we've been printing a lot of them recently in the Daher. What happened in the later years, it changed that the Rebbe started to be Magia every farbrengen and every Shabbos, and then the whole signet of the farbrengens changed also. It was much shorter, and the classical hanacha stopped. What happened then?
Well, a few things, I think. First of all, we got better and better. The better we got, the less sagaz the Rebbe needed, to be honest. Because, like Rabbi El told me many times, in his early years, the Rebbe would sometimes rewrite, not because it wasn't written well. So we learned a lot. I learned a lot from the Rebbe himself, so we got better. Also, technology, the Rebbe recognized that, for example, the sikh is being printed in Kfar Chabad or Algemeiner, and faxes and other technology. So I think the Rebbe saw that as an opportunity to get more of his words out there. So I think the Rebbe put more time into, basically the end of Mem Vav, the Rebbe started being Magia more often. But it came to Mem Zayin, maybe, and also the court case, Hey Tevis. And the Rebbe, usually Mevaz B'Za'itzis. So the Rebbe started being Magia every week. Basically from end of Mem Vav, early Mem Zayin, the Rebbe's Magia every farbrengen almost.
So in the beginning, it was more of like hanacha, but then it changed to more like a likut. No, then it's not.
Yeah. Hanacha is built in mugah. Then the Rebbe started being Magia these built in mugas. So we started preparing them in a much more thorough way.
Why?
Because the Rebbe is going to be Magia.
So it's not just a transcript.
Yeah. So now you can elaborate more.
You're saying since the Rebbe is being Magia, so therefore it should be reworked a little bit, like look at the Sichos.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then we started doing that. So by the time of Mem Zayin came around, we were preparing the Sichos a lot more, knowing that Rebbe was Magia. Now, if the Rebbe was not Magia, we wouldn't have printed it. We would go back to the original Hanocha. In other words, Hanocha could be a little more, not so everything is spelled out. When the Rebbe is Magia, you can really go much further into it. To any topic. Okay,
so I wanna go to Nun Aleph and Beis, and maybe we'll conclude on this over here. So obviously the Rebbe's been it's a whole different thing. The Rebbe's being Magia every week. The whole thing. It's different than there's no shaylos. I mean, the shaylos too, but it's a different work. You're writing something with Magia. It's a whole process.
Yeah.
And then in an Aleph and a Beis, the signet of the Sichos is very different. Things are changing, the way the Rebbe is speaking, and what the Rebbe is speaking about. What is something you want to highlight from then?
First of all, where did you hear that Nun Aleph and Nun Beis is so different than Nun, for example?
I don't mean Nun Aleph and Beis versus Nun. I mean later.
Well,
years.
let's have to clarify this. After the Rebbetzins Stalkos, things changed dramatically. Not right away, by the way. The first farbrengen after Chav Beis Shvat was Shabbos Parsha Mishpatim. I wrote that farbrengen. That was pretty much a usual farbrengen. Same structure. Obviously, the Rebbe spoke about the Rebbetzins and so on. After Pesach, Memches, the farbrengen started shortening, like half. Instead of a farbrengen going till 6 o'clock, it went till 3 o'clock, or 5:30, 3 o'clock. The Rebbe started cutting out the Rashi Sichos, the Zoyar, Memches already. End of summer Memches, after Sazriim and Seder Memches, more or less almost everything went. The end of Memches, the Rebbe stopped saying Maimorim. So the whole structure of farbrengen changed. And that's one thing. Secondly, the Rebbe started combining, everything was connected. And Geula became very much, as the time passed, by time Memtes and Nun, especially Nun, the Rebbe started, everything was Geula. Yesh L'Kasher, the Pasha with the Geula. And it became harder to discern, identify the theme. Like before Memches, it was very clear that Rebbe was speaking about Yud Shvat or he's going to speak about Shavuos, whatever. Here he started mixing Shavuos and the Parsha and this. So the Sichos were a lot harder to write, because we had to find what is the central theme. And the Rebbe would always give us a structure. Now we had to create a structure. By the Rebbe, it was almost like everything was it was combining everything. So the Rebbe's style of speaking changed. And, but we still used the same method of writing like we always did over the years, because that was the only model we knew. So the real changes, I would say, is not so much in the structure of the Sikha, it's the themes. Geula became very, very dominant. Like you'll see Geulas everywhere. Like the Rebbe will say right away, in the Pasha, Yesh L'Kasha Zem de Geula. That was not the style before Memches. So Geula that was a main difference in my mind. And harder to identify the themes. But since the Rebbe was Magia, we could ask the Rebbe, and that's how we got through it. But it was a lot harder work. It was a lot more difficult. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
That was the main changes. I'm not getting now into about in Staim Avedis Haberurim and what that means. That's already another discussion. But all of it became also a sense of urgency. You could sense that the Rebbe was speaking much more. Atat Kum Moshiach. There was that language was much stronger.
So maybe we'll conclude with this. Those sichos and Avlan Beis is the Isat to the last sichos that we have and Torah we have from the Rebbe.
Yeah.
So in a way, there's a lashon from the Rebbe, Halavai Shayim Medaktikim for the Frierdiker Rebbe in the last year.
Yeah.
So what is that message? What is the overarching message that the Rebbe is giving to Chassidim in that tkufa?
Okay, good, very good. It's a good place to sum up. I think I'll answer it a little more broadly. Being that I started writing sichos, I'll connect it to everything we've been talking. I started writing sichos Tavshin Mem. President Reagan became president Tavshin Mem, 1980. The Rebbe started very strongly Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Neach in 1980. So I see in many ways my career in the sichos very much aligned with the so-called last kufa, the Esata, that is. That, the Rebbe was building up, in Maimar Bas Lagani Tavshin Yal, the Rebbe says Deir Hashvi, but then you don't hear the Deir Hashvi a lot more in the early those years. And then the Rebbe built the Moisdes, and then the Shlichus, Chabad houses, Miftzayim, but in Tavshin Mem, the Rebbe starts, a little more for Tavshin Mem, starts Daf Einem in the Welt. The Rebbe went from Melech Yisrael to Melech Kol Haaretz, sometimes the way Chassidim put it. So you saw that clearly. I saw it every day in this, all the sichos. I saw the shift. The Rebbe was becoming much more global, more universal. Kinus Hashluchim Elomi, the Rebbe touched to God, Kibbush Elam. So when it came Memches, and the Rebbe started much stronger about Geula, that Shugi puts the Kneplach, not Effen the Egen, the Welt is great. I'm using all the Lashanas. Tutals Vasirkant, everything. All that wasn't like an out of the blue. It was a continuation of okay, we're coming out to the end of the story. So the Rebbe gave us the final marching orders, like Rabbi Krasniansky said, and many of Chazar from Chayesar and Nun Beis, that now Kabbalah's Pnei Mashiach. Now we're ready to do the final push, Geula. So I think it's what the Rebbe said, Chav Ches Nissen, that we have to do everything possible to bring the Geula. Now it was always the Aveda, but it was more through Miftzayim and more through Pu'ulas. Now it became we got to teach the world the real thing, Ened Movade, that this is it. And the Rebbe started with the Yalkut Shmeni and all that. It was all, if you think about it, it was all a logical process. People make a big mistake. They say the Rebbe was, I don't want to even use the word, but the Rebbe, after the Rebbe was more desperate, Kav Yochel, Rachmana Litzlan. I don't see it all that way. The Rebbe was very methodical. It was the stages. So what the Rebbe left us with, I don't know Gimel Tammuz, I'm not trying to explain Gimel Tammuz. He left us with the final marching orders, that the world is ready to hear the real thing, teach them real Chassidus, the Mayonis, Molar is Deus Hashem. Look now, with AI and everything. It's obvious. The world is ready to things that, the Rebbe was ahead of his time and said it already. I saw Memches and through Nun Beis and that lens, that the Rebbe was seeing that this was now coming to like the eruption is about to happen. And that was the tone of the Rebbe, very urgent and so on. So we got a job to do. That's what the Rebbe left us
And the
with.
fact that it didn't happen then is our fault. Is our fault?
No, yeah, it means we didn't do what we had to do. But you know what? We could also say, why did the Rebbe have a little rachmanis on us? We're simple people. Just bring the gula already. But yeah, I don't like to say so anyone's. I will say that I did not do everything I have to do. You have to answer that question yourself. Well, your audience should answer that question. You have to look at yourself. You can't stop pointing fingers at others. Because that's not the derech. Everyone's going to say, it was your fault, you didn't do on this. Like the guys that are machlekes, they say, I'm not machlekes. If you stop machlekes, there'd be peace. I said, what does that mean? He has to agree with you. Yeah, if he agrees with me, there won't be a machlekes. Of course, I understand. My point is that we have to look at ourselves. And the words are there. He says, the Rebbe said, derech yeshara, Reinstellen the Aleph von Lufish Leilam in Gela makes the Gula. It's, to me, it's all about a revolution of Yifutz Meinesecha Chutza. That head should reach 8 billion people, not just a billion. How's that?
Between the head and the Algemeiner.
Yeah, exactly. And Meaningful Life Center, yeah.
Meaningful Life Center.
Yeah.
Shakayach Gadol Rabbi Jacobson.
Thank you. Did I cook? You have a show till 3 o'clock in the morning.
3 o'clock in the morning. Okay, very good.